Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome back. Welcome back to day two of the International Invasive Species and Climate Change Conference, or ISC. I'm going to do a very slow start here to allow folks to continue coming in for the second day. So I'm Chelsea Nagy. I'm the founder of the North Central Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Network, or RISC. And we're excited that you came back for today for day two, or if you're just joining us for the first time, then welcome. We're happy to have you. So some of the highlights from yesterday were the plenary talk by Sylvia Ziller and the Community Action Awards presented to Caitlin Faulkner and Invasives Canada. But all of the sessions yesterday were fantastic. The talks were great. So thank you to all of the speakers so far and all of our panelists and presenters for participating. We have another great lineup scheduled for you today, but I first wanted to give you all a bit of background information. And this is only a couple minutes long, so if you were here yesterday and heard this, don't worry, we'll be through it shortly. Let me advance my screen. Okay, so the first risk was started in the Northeast region of the US, and it really serves as a model for all of us who created other risk networks across the US. And so there are a bunch of regional risks now across the US, including a couple others that are just starting in the South Central and Southwest that are not yet shown on this map, as well as a national organization that's very similar in Canada. And so in recent years, we've formed a strong collaboration across the risk or an inter-risk network. And we work together on events like this conference. We also write collaborative papers together and work on writing management briefs together. We host webinars. So if you'd like to get involved in any of the risks, please reach out and we can add you to our listserv so that you can hear about upcoming events and opportunities and hear about our products. So our collective mission of the risk is to ultimately reduce the impacts of invasive species in a changing climate. And we do this kind of through four key mechanisms: synthesizing relevant science, sharing the needs and knowledge of managers, building stronger communities that bridge between scientists and managers, and then lastly, conducting priority research to fill the gaps that are needed. And so we create a lot of really great products. I'd encourage you to check out our website to learn about some of our products. You can visit us at the QR code shown here on the slide. But really, we play a boundary spanning role. So we bridge communities. And you'll notice that in our sessions today that we're really bringing people together from a bunch of different places. So I believe we have now close to 2,500 community members, which is awesome. And again, this spans sectors, types of organizations, and disciplines. And our job is really to create opportunities for these different communities to work together to address invasive species in a changing climate. Okay, I'll run through a couple quick announcements here to get us started. So first, if you're interested in joining the Menti poll that we showed yesterday, you can go to this QR code here and tell us a little bit about where you're from, what you work on, those kinds of things. This is really useful information for us to have. So if you haven't filled out the Menti poll already, please go to this poll and fill that out when you get a second to do so. The next announcement, bingo. So if you haven't yet played bingo, we encourage you to do so today. So the idea is you can scan this QR code and download your bingo card. And then when you hear a term that is displayed on your bingo card, you can mark it off. And when you get 5 in a row, then you get bingo. Okay, so additionally, for today, if you get bingo, you will also have a chance to play in our Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me session that we're hosting later on this afternoon. So if you're interested in do that, we encourage you to play bingo. Okay, and then the last announcement, we are going to be asking you all to fill out this post-conference survey. And so you can do this at the QR code shown here. But this gives us important feedback on what you thought about the conference, what you thought went well, what we could improve for next time, things like that. So please do fill out the survey if you get a chance to do so. It should only take a couple of minutes. And now I will turn it over to Wes Daniel from the Southeast Risk to introduce our plenary speaker.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Ross Cuthbert. Ross is a lecturer at the School of Biological Sciences at Queen's University Belfast in Northern Ireland. He's also a research associate at the South Africa Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity and a member of the Young Academic Ireland. His research focuses on quantifying and predicting the impacts of biological invasions on ecosystems, economies, and health, with an aim at improving management strategies. He's also developed approaches to better understand the spatial and temporal dynamics of invasion and their impacts. He previously held fellowships that were funded by the Leverhulme Trust at Queen's University Belfast and the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation for the Center for Ocean Research. He serves on the editorial boards of Marine Biology and Neobiota. So, welcome, Dr. Cuthbert, and I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for the introduction. It's a real privilege to be here speaking today on this really important topic. Good evening from Northern Ireland. I'm going to be talking today about the economic dimensions of biological invasions and how climate change might contribute to their escalation in future. So a bit of global context to set the background for biological invasions. So obviously invasive species are a symptom of global change and one that really reflects the intensification and diversification of trade and transport networks. So here are global aviation and shipping networks, and it's easy to see just how much we've made the world more connected and have overcome biogeographic barriers that historically kept species communities separate. So things like ocean ranges, mountains, and so on. And as a result of this, we've seen rising numbers of non-native species as these networks have increased over time. There's currently at least 37,000 reported non-native species globally. And although this seems like a large number, it's only about 1% of global biodiversity. So there's a large potential for future invasions to occur from this global source pool of species. As you can see in the graph, the figure on this slide, the rates of invasion have been increasing, and they've particularly been increasing since around the mid-1800s, so since industrialization really commenced. And this again reflects patterns of globalization. So we've seen rising invasion rates. We've also seen rising impacts across all dimensions of sustainability, so ecologically, socially, and economically. Biological invasions are one of the major drivers of biodiversity declines, having contributed in part at least to 60% of reported extinction events. They also affect yields of things like crops. They damage infrastructures. They can cause severe human health issues, including mortality. They degrade ecosystem services, and they cost a lot of money. And as a result, they impede upon most, if not all, sustainable development goals. But as you can tell from the title of my talk, I'm going to be talking mostly today about the economic and the monetary aspects of biological invasions, so their economic costs. And the evidence for the economic costs from biological invasions stem from the InvaCost project, where in the last decade or so, we've created the first open updatable database of invasion economic costs, with the aims to raise awareness of the invasions issue by quantifying their massive monetary costs and applying a common metric and a standardized methodology to do so, with that common metric being cash value, so something that's really well understood around the world by decision makers, the public, but also researchers. So we really want to raise public awareness and compel decision makers to make more efficient and cost-effective decisions around environmental issues, and particularly to raise the issue of invasions up the global environmental agenda. Because ideally, we should be managing invasions because of their severe environmental effects. But the hope is that the economic costs will provide a catalyst for further management motivation. So what have we found globally? We've seen, based on these data, that the economic impacts from biological invasions are rising over time, and they're rising exponentially. So here, these two curves are actually exponential because the y-axis is on a log 10 scale. And we can see that over time, the damage costs in red and the management costs in blue have been increasing. And since around the turn of the century, so the year 2000, damage costs have been higher than management spending. So what we've been spending on managing invasive species hasn't been keeping pace with the speed at which their damages are accruing, although both are rising over time. And the latest estimates are really eye-watering for the economic costs of biological invasion. So a figure in the flagship IPBES report on invasive alien species and their control highlighted that the latest annual estimate is exceeding $420 billion annually. And this figure is quadrupling every decade based on the previous trajectory. So the costs are very, very high. Beyond these global studies, we've done lots of other cost syntheses. It's been a really collaborative project, and the work I'm presenting today, I should say, really reflects the work done by a broader consortium. And my involvement in this network stems from two workshops, the first one being in Paris in 2019, and the second one being in Marrakesh in 2022. And these workshops really brought together a range of early career researchers, predominantly in natural and social sciences, to work on this new INVICOST database. And it really was the start of my involvement in the project in 2019. And together we've done lots of work, we've published lots of papers, we've done lots of individual studies on economic costs because it's important to look at the costs under different contexts. And we've done so many studies that we've actually prepared a review on the studies we've done, and the main themes that we've conducted are highlighted on the right-hand side. So we've done economic cost syntheses on a range of topics. We've looked at different taxa, so the economic costs of different invasive taxonomic groups. We've looked at different geographic regions at both continental, regional, as well as national scales. We've looked at cost syntheses for different habitats, different sectors, and we've done a range of different conceptual studies focused on things like modeling of cost trajectories or reporting of the database and the R package. So there's a real rich variety of studies on the economic costs of biological invasions, and I obviously don't have time to get into the detail of each of these. But the review paper we published a couple of years ago is quite useful as an overview, I think. So to focus a little bit on a couple of the key papers that have come out of the INVICOST project first. So we've looked at things like the economic costs of invasions to different sectors of the economy. And we found that the global cost isn't distributed evenly across different components of the economy. So this part of the figure shows the aggregate cost globally to different sectors. And we can see that the economic impact is predominantly borne by sectors such as agriculture, where obviously invasions can affect yields, and these have quite direct cash values that are fairly easy to quantify. But there's also really substantial impacts to sectors such as public and social welfare, forestry, authorities and stakeholders, and the environment. So invasions are impacting a lot of different sectors. However, they tend to be biased towards sectors which we call primary sectors. So ones where there's really a direct production value. So things like agriculture and forestry. At the bottom, you can see that large shares of costs are mixed or unspecified. So often invasions are impacting multiple sectors, at least when their costs are reported. But they're also often reported against unspecific sectors. We can also look at the proportion of costs which are spent on management compared to damages across different sectors. So here on the right-hand side, for each individual sector, we show the proportional spending on damage in purple, management in dark blue, and mixed damage and management in light blue. And we can see that for the sectors which incur the highest invasion costs, so particularly agriculture, public and social welfare, and forestry, there's a predominance of damages. So really across the vast majority of sectors, more is being spent on damages rather than trying to manage the costs of invasions. And actually, often the management costs aren't incurred by the same sectors that are incurring the damages. In another project, and this starts to link into the climate change context, we compared the economic impacts of biological invasions in terms of their damages to damages caused by natural hazards, raising the question of whether we should consider biological invasions as a natural hazard given the severity of their economic costs. So since 1980, we found that the economic costs of biological invasions order on a similar level to storms, earthquakes, and floods, and are on a higher order of magnitudes than things like droughts, wildfire, extreme temperatures, and so on. So perhaps we should be considering invasions at a similar level of severity to these other phenomena. But actually, more alarmingly, when we look at the rate of increase over time, the economic costs of biological invasions are going up much more rapidly. So since 1980, the economic impacts of biological invasions have increased by over 700%. And this is a much faster rate than the increase in other natural hazards such as storms or floods, which are also climatically driven. And that's not to downplay the importance of these other natural hazards, but just to show the rate of increase in invasion costs in context. So we really should probably be taking invasions more seriously and perhaps communicating their issues more effectively to decision makers. We should also perhaps be tracking invasions as billion-dollar disaster events in a similar way to what has been done with the US billion-dollar disaster events database. So many of you will be familiar with this, but it shows over time the increasing occurrence of climatic disasters which have cost over $1 billion US. And that increase has been largely due to things like storms as well as cyclones. And you can see that, again, the increase is quite rapid over time. So I think invasion biology can learn a lot from climate sciences in terms of reporting of impacts and communicating impacts. Much like the increase in rate of biological invasions, there has been a really rapid and increasingly intense increase in global temperatures. So these are the well-known climate stripes, which are a public communication tool for temperature change. And we can see that against temperature baselines, moving from left to right, there's been an increase in global temperatures over time that many of you will be familiar with. So we know that both biological invasions and climate change are intensifying, but obviously there's also links between the two phenomena. This is a figure from a paper published a few years ago that started to draw links between global environmental change, particularly climate change, and biological invasions. And in essence, it shows that climate change and biological invasions can interact in a variety of ways, different ecological ways, but also in terms of our human responses to climate change. So in the blue box, climate change can affect biological invasions by affecting the distributions of species. It can also affect the local abundance of taxa, often boosting the performance of non-natives, which can be thermophilic. It can also change the strength of biotic interactions, often intensifying things like predation, and also shift and affect ecosystem functions and services. There's a variety of ways that climate change is intrinsically linked to the ecological responses and effects of biological invasions, but also the way we respond to climate change in terms of management, policy, legislation can affect biological invasion. So with climate change, we're seeing the opening up of new transport pathways, such as the melting of the Arctic sea ice. That's opening up new trade routes, which could potentially bring new biological invasions by connecting new pools of species, but also the ways we adapt and mitigate climate change. So if we're planting trees and we plant non-native species, that can proliferate another global change while trying to address climate change. But also things like species translocations, habitat creation through infrastructures for things like seawalls could provide more settings that could be readily invaded. So we need to be thinking about both stressors when we're thinking about designing management strategies. There's been a good bit of work quantitatively linking invasions and climate change. This is a paper published again a few years ago looking at the ecological impacts of global environmental change and invasion separately, using effect sizes, as you can see in the plot on the right-hand side here. And what this study did is it compared the ecological effects of global environmental change and invasion separately, and also the co-occurrence of global environmental change and invasion, so when they were studied at the same time. Firstly, what the study found was that the impacts from invasions and global environmental change are generally negative, so they have negative overall effects on ecosystems. However, the effects of invasions tend to be more negative than global environmental change alone. And when I say global environmental change, this study looked at things like pollution, climate change, nutrient enrichment, and things like that. So invasions generally have a significant negative effect on ecosystems. When the study looked at the combined effects of invasions and global environmental change, it didn't find that the effects were much more negative overall than the effects of invasive species alone. So at face value, this could suggest that invasions are the driving force and global environmental change doesn't necessarily affect invasions in a substantial way. However, saying that would be a bit misleading because we know that a lot of the effects, a lot of the outcomes of invasions and climate change are unpredictable, and that's because of the occurrence of non-additive effects. So this study found that only about 5% of the time the effects of biological invasions and climate change are predictable based on their individual sums. So the vast majority of the time, the effects of both stresses when combined are unpredictable. So they often exceed what we would expect based on their individual consequences. And when we think about synergistic effects, so that's when their effects when combined are substantially different than what their individual effects would tell us, they tend to be negative for the largest share of the time. So often the effects of biological invasions and climate change are unsurprising, and a large share of these surprises are more detrimental than we would think based on their individual interactions. So to summarize a bit so far on the links between invasions and climate, so biological invasions and climate change are intensifying. Climate change will often boost invasion rates and the performance of non-native species. The impacts from these stressors can co-occur, and when they do co-occur, they're often unpredictable in terms of their outcomes. And we don't know very much about how the economic impacts of invasions will change with climate, although studies have obviously looked at the ecological consequences. So there's quite severe knowledge gaps. So for the remainder of this talk, I want to talk about 4 key areas through which we can advance the economic cost assessments of invasions under climate change. So I'm going to unpack these areas in more detail, but I'll go over them very briefly. So the first area is the filling of taxonomic, geographic, and sectoral knowledge gaps. The second area is identifying and linking climatic, economic, and biotic drivers of invasion costs. Thirdly, to develop and link different metrics for invasion impacts across economic, environmental, and health dimensions. And lastly, fourthly, to motivate proactive strategies for prevention of future invasions and climate costs. So to talk first about the knowledge gaps around invasion costs in relation to climate. So we know that costs are massive, but we also know that they're scarcely reported. And what we know about invasion costs really represents the tip of the iceberg. And there's lots of costs that have gone unreported for a variety of reasons. And the 5 key reasons are shown on this slide in blue. So when we're doing our cost assessments, we often have those which we call unaccounted. These are things that are less reliable or extrapolated, and we often don't include these in our estimates because they come with more uncertainty or questions. Costs are often, secondly, inaccessible. So they're in things like unpublished reports buried in desks They're not available through our searches because they don't use terminology that is typical in invasion science. So they use maybe things like pests or weeds without talking about the invasion status of species. Costs are often, thirdly, non-monetizable. So it's difficult to put monetary values on lots of effects of biological invasions. So the values, for example, of extinctions or impacted species, non-market ecosystem services, or the loss of cultural identity values. These things are quite difficult to grapple with in monetary terms, and indeed estimating those costs is an entire field in of itself. Fourthly, we can have costs that are simply missing due to biased research efforts, taxonomic and geographic gaps, and things like the costs of spreading pathogens, which are quite difficult to deal with in an invasions framework. And lastly, fifthly, costs can be non-monetized. So things like our own salaries, indirect losses of income, or education losses. So in broad terms, those things all contribute to our underreporting of costs. One of the clearest ways to show the cost scarcity is that geographically. So the map on the left-hand side here shows the numbers of established invasive species globally at the top, and at the bottom, the numbers of invasive species with a reported monetary cost in INVOCOST. And while the numbers of species differ because one corresponds to established species and one corresponds to a subset of those with economic costs, we can see generally that the pattern is quite similar and that we have large numbers of invasive species or costly invasive species in more economically developed countries. Large parts of the world, particularly in Africa, South America, and lots of Asia, have a very low reported number of established invasive species compared to more developed countries. And in turn, they have a lower number of invasive species with reported invasion costs. And importantly, often countries which have some invasive species reported don't have any invasion costs for those species. So we know that invasions are occurring. We know that those species can often have impacts, but there's no monetary costs available. And we see a similar picture now on the right-hand side when we look at the monetary costs themselves. So instead of looking at the numbers of species, we look at the total costs at the top and the average cost per species at the bottom. And again, we can see that these cost distributions are heavily biased towards countries which are more developed rather than countries which are less developed. Despite this difference in the absolute costs of biological invasions around the world, a recent study showed that damages from invasive species are actually most severe in less developed countries relative to their management expenditure. So countries which have the lowest capacity to respond to invasions, which are typically less developed, tend to incur a disproportionately high amount of damages compared to management. So although the absolute costs of biological invasions in less developed countries can be lower, they're actually disproportionately susceptible to these effects. But we need better data to improve planning there as well. This has quite a lot of similarities with climate change vulnerability. So we know that the effects of climate change aren't borne equally around the world. And the same countries which have the lowest capacity to manage biological invasions, both in terms of proactive and reactive responses, are also the most vulnerable to effects of climate change. So the same regions with cost data scarcity and unpreparedness are exposed to the greatest climatic threats. And this exposes large parts of the world to a potential sort of double whammy effect of invasions and climate change, where we don't know very much about the impacts of invasions, which hampers preparedness, but the countries are also going to experience high rates of climate change and impacts from climate change with very little management capacity to deal with both of them. So how can we address data gaps around invasion costs and in biological invasions in general? Obviously, we could encourage more reporting, we could encourage more research, but it's quite difficult to do that in resource-limited situations. So in an invasion cost context, we've recently been using and developing new tools to address cost data deficits. And one recent approach we used to combine species distribution models with macroeconomic variables. So effectively, we predicted the distribution of known invasive species with costs, and we looked at the overlaps of these distributions with economic activity. So for example, things like agriculture, which we know are predictive of economic impacts from invasions. So in doing so, we could basically overlay where the economic sectors are relative to where the invasive species are. And in doing so, we found that the global costs of invasions are potentially much higher than has been reported previously. So this study found that they're potentially 500% higher than what's been reported in InvaCost. These increases were consistent across taxonomic groups. So on the top right, we show the difference in the costs which have been reported in InvaCost, shown by the darker shades, and the interpolated costs, or the predicted costs, in the lighter shades. On the left-hand side, we show damage costs, and on the right-hand side, we show management costs. And although the relative increase is different across different taxonomic groups, which is shown on the y-axis, our predictions led to an increase in the economic costs of biological invasions, which is substantially higher than what we have in our database so far. So this approach allowed us to produce the most high-resolution heat map of economic impacts of biological invasions globally, effectively allowing us to identify potential hotspots for the economic costs of biological invasions. So instead of looking at the national level, we're now looking subnationally at where the highest impacts from invasive species are occurring globally. And on the bottom right, we can see that there's hotspots in large parts of the United States, but also across much of Europe, Southern Australia, China, and parts of Southern Africa in particular. So there's lots of opportunity here to link these cost distributions to other aspects, and particularly to link these economic impacts with potential climate change scenarios and climate change impact forecasts across similar parts of the world. So those are some approaches to potentially fill knowledge gaps, but we also want to think mechanistically about climate change, economics, and bardic drivers of invasion costs. So a recent preprint has actually done the first global analysis of how climate change scenarios might worsen the economic impacts of biological invasions. So this study looked at 3 different SSP scenarios, so shared socioeconomic pathways, and it found that across all of these scenarios and across many taxonomic groups, which are shown by the different subplots on the right-hand side, the economic impacts of biological invasions are expected to increase significantly under global climate change. The top left panel on the figure shows the outcome across all taxa globally, and the remaining panels break it down by individual groups as reflected by the silhouettes on the top left of each one. But the global picture based on this model paints an up to 21% increase in invasion costs by 2060, and that's just considering the invasions that have already occurred. And we can see that across all individual taxa with good data, there's expected to be an increase significantly across all climate change scenarios. So climate change is going to aggravate the economic costs of biological invasions, but this is likely to be conservative given that it doesn't consider new invasions. The taxa at the bottom, which don't show a significant effect, are typically those which have the poorest data availability. So things like amphibians, reptiles, and species of fish, they don't have good invasion cost availability, so it's more difficult to make accurate predictions for those groups. But the global picture is that climate change is going to aggravate invasion costs. We can also think about how we might connect traits and economics and climate to invasion costs, because we know that invasive species bring traits to their invaded region, and this invaded region also has macroeconomic characteristics, and we can use these 2 things to predict invasion costs. So on the right-hand side, we show a range of different traits and a range of different sectors. These are just examples, so they're not exhaustive. But in terms of traits, invasive species often have a particular morphology, particular fecundities, physiologies, and feeding patterns. And different countries or different regions have a variety of economic sectors, so things like fisheries, biotech, infrastructure, and agricultural sectors. And we propose that invasion costs are a sort of lock and key mechanism between these traits and sectors. So for an economic impact to occur, there must be a match between the traits an invasive species brings to a given economy and the susceptibility of that given sector to economic costs. So a bit of an example on the bottom left, we have things like zebra mussels, which are well known to clog water intake pipes, but they only do so because they have certain traits that allows them to have that effect. So particularly related to their morphology, their fecundity, their ability to adhere to human-made surfaces. Similarly, if we have an invasive species which impacts agriculture, it might be characterized by particular feeding traits. So it might be a bit more specialist towards crops which are of high value. We can also get a bit more conceptual. So on the bottom right are effectively a bag of different trait profiles, T1 through to T4, shown in orange, and 4 different economic sectors, shown in sector 1 through to sector 4 in blue. We can link traits to sectors. So here, T1, which is trait 1, has an impact on sector 1 and sector 3. Trait 2 currently doesn't impact any economic sectors. Trait 3 and trait 4 currently impact sector 2, and sector 4 currently doesn't have any economic impacts from biological invasions. But the strength of these relationships can also change. So trait 1 has a greater impact on sector 3 than sector 1, as shown by the thickness of the line. Trait 3 and trait 4 also have different impacts on sector 2. For example, those traits have a different affinity to impact individual sectors. But it can get more complicated because when we throw climate change into the mix, as well as the arrival of new genetic material or economic growth, we can have a change in the relative importance of different traits. So for example, with climatic warming, we could have a change in the reproductive output of a given species or a change in their physiology or feeding rate. And if those traits are currently linked to economic impacts on a given sector, that could further aggravate their economic costs. But similarly, we know that economic sectors aren't static, they can grow or retract as invasions go on. And this means that the importance of sectors can change in terms of their susceptibility to impact. And in particular, we know that the size of the economy correlates with the potential for that economy to receive an economic cost. So if we have a sector which grows a lot in climate change conditions or retracts, that can affect its ability to incur economic costs from invasions. So it's a bit conceptual, but it basically suggests that traits and economic characteristics are useful to predict invasion costs, but both of those things are likely to shift under climate change. So we need to be quite agile in how we consider them. And we recently unpacked all this in a paper published in Trends in Ecology and Evolution. And perhaps in future, we can move towards identifying trait syndromes to predict economic costs of invasions under changing climate. The third area I want to get into is the developing and linking of economic, environmental, and health impact metrics. So we've talked a lot about the economic costs of biological invasions. Monetary costs are a useful quantitative metric to put a cash value on the impacts of invasive species, but we don't have similar metrics for the ecological and health outcomes, which are arguably more complex. So this is a figure from the recent IPBES report, or a publication associated with it. And it shows the metrics used for the health and ecological dimensions. And these are a bit more simplistic. So for health, it's based on the occurrence of impacts on good quality of life. And for ecological effects, it's focused on extinctions. And while these are useful, they don't capture the full complexity of the effects of biological invasions because lots of ecological consequences happen before extinction occurs, and the effects on health can be much more enriched than that. And I think a lack of metrics for the magnitude and diversity of these different forms of impacts can ultimately impede communication. So we're currently working on other projects. I've talked a lot about InvaCost, but we're also working on the InvaPact project and the InvaHealth project, which are doing a similar sort of assessment for the ecological and health impacts of invasions, respectively. They're following similar steps. So for both of these, we've been classifying the typology of impacts. So coming up with the various ways invasions can impact ecosystems and health. We've been testing different metrics to capture these typologies and different impact severities. We've then been collating literature, so evidence, building databases with that evidence, and starting to do different impact analyses. And while these projects are at different stages of development, hopefully down the line, we'll reach the point where we can have an integrative assessment of the impacts of biological invasions on ecosystems, economies, and health. And in doing so, we can potentially fill knowledge gaps because we can test for connections among the different ways invasive species have impact. So we might be able to predict ecological effects from the economic effects. And in doing so, we can start to fill knowledge gaps. So for example, we might know what the impacts economically are of a species, but not the ecological effects. And if we can draw relationships, we can do better predictions. And we can ultimately move towards a more integrative and quantitative assessment of invasion impacts. And moving beyond that, it will be important to link climate change to these impacts. So a sort of fourth dimension, which is more integrative across all of these, is thinking about how future climate change could contribute to the proliferation or change in these effects over time. The last area I'm going to get into quite briefly, but it's perhaps the most important one, is to motivate proactive strategies for prevention of future invasions and climate costs. So across invasion science, reactive management is the norm. This is a figure from a paper I led a few years ago, and we looked at the proportional management spending by individual countries around the world. And we split management into three different domains: post-invasion management, which is things like control, so things you do after an invasive species becomes established. Pre-invasion management, which is shown by the blue axis, corresponds to things like prevention or biosecurity, so things you do to stop an invasion from happening. And knowledge/funding, which corresponds to things like research and communications. We can see that across the world, most countries prioritize post-invasion. They spend typically at least 90% of their budgets on post-invasion measures. Relatively few countries are investing larger shares of their budgets on proactive investments, as well as funding for communication or research. And therefore, this seems to indicate that we need a paradigm shift in the way we're managing invasive species towards more proactivity, more pre-invasion measures to stop invasions from happening in the first place. And indeed, when we fit other mathematical models to these kinds of data to look at the amount we could save by earlier actions, we found that investing $1 in management could pay massive dividends, with about $54 saved in potential avoided damages. So there's lots that could be gained by investing in management, and particularly proactive management to stop invasions from happening in the first place. Similar costs of inaction have been drawn in climate science. So this recent paper that came out in the last year or two looked at the amount of potential damages that could be incurred under changing climate scenarios. So there's time on the x-axis and loss of income is shown on the y-axis. And effectively, it shows that climate change on a per capita level is going to make us much poorer. The green line shows the mitigation costs under the least severe or less severe climate scenario, RCP 2.6. The purple shows the climatic damages associated with RCP 2.6. And the orange trajectory shows the climate damages under RCP 8.5, which is a much more severe scenario. And what these trajectories show is that climate change impacts are going to have a severe effect on our income, but the more severe scenarios are going to have a drastically greater impact, particularly towards the end of this century. So by investing now and trying to stop trajectories from moving towards these more severe outcomes, we're going to save a lot of money in terms of the impacts we're going to feel down the line from avoided damages as well as avoided needs for longer term adaptation and management. And a similar effect has been shown with invasion costs. So the vast majority of countries are going to be paying much more for long-term management if we don't try and mitigate the more severe climate change effects linked to invasion. But this is also a gap because no studies have yet looked at how these two phenomena might integrate in terms of future costs. So thinking about how climate change and invasions could interact and be concurrently managed to deal with their impacts. So I think I've gone a bit over my time, but just to summarize those key points, economic costs from biological invasions are massive. They cost trillions, and they're projected to rise in future with changing climate. Cost reporting is biased among habitats, taxa, and sectors, leading to underestimation, but we can address that with some new modeling approaches potentially. Invasion biology needs better metrics to reach decision makers and quantify impacts, as well as indicate risks, particularly for the ecological and health dimensions, which we can hopefully integrate in future. We need better predictions to think about how biotic, climatic, and socioeconomic changes will affect invasion costs. And lastly, we need a paradigm shift in how we manage both invasions and climate change towards greater proactivity, and ideally with integrative responses. So when we're managing invasions and climate change individually, we need to think about the knock-on effects on potential other global changes down the line. I'm going to take my position as a speaker now to plug our international conference on aquatic invasive species, which is being held in Belfast, where I'm based, next August. So registration is now open. So if you're interested in aquatic invasions, do consider attending this conference. And we're also interested in potential sponsorship opportunities. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions around all of that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Cuthbert. Yes, I appreciate all the love and the applause that we're getting there for all of our emojis. There are a couple questions here, and we have about 13 minutes before our break. So let's dive into these. So I will preface this first one. I think they followed up saying that you answered the question, but it's a good question because I had a similar question, so I'm going to ask it anyway. From anonymous attendee, your statement that the costs are mainly borne by certain sectors, but I think we can likely agree that there are more eyes and metrics applied to ag, etc., and fewer applied to like landscape scale, environmental, or natural resource cost. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons we have more costs for things like agriculture is that they're just more readily available. It's very easy or relatively easy to put an economic cost on an impact on a produce, for example, than it is on some other ecological service or component of biodiversity. So I think just because those costs are more readily available in terms of direct cash values, that's why we have the severe and disproportionate effects on those sectors, particularly things like environmental impacts. You know, they're not readily monetized. So although we know that the environmental effects are really severe, we don't have good monetary values for those. But arguably, we shouldn't even have good monetary values for those. We should just have better metrics to communicate what the ecological ramifications are. So we also shouldn't ideally be too reliant on cash values, but hopefully it's a good catalyst to motivate more action.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Laura is asking, I'm interested in what you said about management costs being incurred by different sectors to those incurring damages. Can you speak more to this issue?
Yeah, so I think it's a broader point in how maybe benefits and costs of invasions are incurred. Often those who maybe benefit from invasions in terms of a particular produce or something for agriculture or fisheries or forestry, they don't necessarily pay the management costs when they escape beyond those boundaries. So for example, if you have an aquaculture facility where you produce non-native species and they escape, the facility often isn't the one who's going to be paying the environmental costs or the management costs. It's often going to be different agencies or government departments, even taxpayers down the line. So there's these sort of externalities that fall when invasions aren't managed or maintained properly. So there's lots of examples, but effectively the costs and benefits with the costs effectively being management in that case aren't borne by the same sectors. So there can be a bit of disparity there in terms of who benefits from invasion and who pays the impacts.
Great point. Thank you. Beth wants to send kudos, and I concur. What a great talk. Beth would like to know if it's possible to share the link to the paper cited where the research is published, or just give the full title. I'm not 100% sure which one it is, but Ross, if you want to maybe drop that in the chat.
Yeah, I can do that. It's probably the review paper.
And Beth, if that's not the correct one, throw it in the chat, and we'll make sure that gets routed back around.
Yeah, I can do that. The review paper I cited at the start has a lot of the papers listed, I think, in a supplementary document, but other ones have been published since that, but I think the majority are captured there.
Okay, wonderful. Couple more minutes. Sam is interested in which countries have invested in knowledge and funding on the pre-invasion. I'm also curious about that.
Yeah, so there's large shares of pre-invasion investment in countries like New Zealand. So they would have quite renowned biosecurity approaches. So they would be spending quite a lot on that kind of area of management. I think that that figure needs to come with a bit of a caveat, and that is based on the proportional management spending. So it's not showing the absolute management spending. So it's also subject to data gap artifacts. So if you have a country which doesn't have very good cost reporting, but the costs which are reported tend to be things related to research or pre-invasion investment, that could skew the results in a way because we don't have a good quantification of their control efforts. But the general picture is that most countries are prioritizing control and eradication efforts over prevention, which is not to say we shouldn't be doing control and eradication. We should for those that we can effectively manage, but we need to be thinking more about prevention. But in terms of absolute investments, things like New Zealand or places like New Zealand are quite high up there in terms of our data.
Sarah has an interesting question. Where the government is investing in pre, post, and in knowledge and generating funding scales based on the relative costs of each of these categories. That was a question. I'm sorry, I did not read that in a question tone. Attempting to eradicate or control species is much more expensive than a horizon scan. I get that at the point in recommending investment in prevention, I'm wondering if the nature of the work would be biased in the manuscript results. So I can read that again if you need me to. So.
Yeah, if it's referring to just inherently control and eradication being more expensive, I think I can speak to that a bit.
So yeah, the government investment in pre-post and knowledge generating scales based on relative cost of each of these categories. So I guess it's the relative relationships between pre-post and knowledge, understanding that control is much more expensive than a pre like horizon scan and prevention efforts.
Yeah, I think obviously eradication and control are often targeting individual invasions, whereas prevention is targeting, entire pathways for invasion all the time. So even in that sense, you also get more bang for your buck, as it were. But obviously, if you're targeting individual invasions with a particular approach, it's going to incur higher costs. But I think it is fair to compare them using monetary values because again, it comes down to the fact that we have a metric to compare the amount of investment in these different dimensions of management. So I think control and eradication or post-invasion approaches in general are going to be more expensive just because they're more limited in terms of often what they're targeting, which is often individual species rather than entire introduction pathways, which could capture lots of different species which could arrive through that means.
And I definitely concur that it's all come from the same pot of money, so the relationship is still very relative. So, Christy is asking, I'm seeing that in some cases, non-native public health sectors, forest pathogens, marine biofouling, etc., there seems to be a terminology issue where some of these are not necessarily categorized as invasive species issues. How do we start speaking the same language to help document and convey cost?
Yeah, it's a very good point. It's something we're thinking about a lot with the InvaHealth project at the minute, where we're trying to think about the different typologies and ways invasions can impact health. And my own biases kind of circle back to things like mosquito-borne disease, where you can have outbreaks of a pathogen like dengue or chikungunya or West Nile virus, which cause health costs. They also cause morbidity and mortality in humans and animals. But often it's difficult to attribute those things to individual invasive species. You can have often a mix of native and invasive vectors in that case, which can spread pathogens. Often as well in the health literature, again, thinking about mosquitoes, if people are working on that group, they don't necessarily refer to them as invasive. They might refer to them as being pests or vectors without considering their invasion status. So often I think the work that is on health impacts of invasions isn't necessarily operating in an invasions framework. So then they're not using the terminology that we might pick up in our sort of more traditional searches for invasion biology literature. So I think public health scientists, invasion biologists, invasion scientists should interact more and speak more about how these different areas overlap and how terminology can be kind of curated to meet both fields' needs. But in general, I think we miss a lot I spoke about vectors, but you know, any study talking about weeds, pests, problem species in general that doesn't talk about invasions makes it quite difficult to think about in an invasions framework because we don't know whether something is native to an area or not, just based on the terminology used without digging more deeply into the biogeography of each species. So I'm not sure if that addresses the question, maybe in a roundabout way, but it's a good point.
An anonymous attendee is curious about management costs of invasive species, the ones that are notably been here for a long period of time. Like in the US, we have wild boar or rats compared to relatively newly arrived invasives.
Yeah, so I think obviously the magnitude of management expenditure required to deal with more widespread invasions is going to reflect the extent of their spread, but also their local abundance. But I think for all of those invasions, effectively acting earlier before they reach a wider distribution or higher abundance can save large amounts of money. And we've done some work looking at the so-called invasion curve, which is effectively an S-shaped relationship between time and invasion magnitudes. And I didn't have time to include it in the talk, but effectively, if you invest much earlier along the invasion curve before the kind of exponential growth of population sets in, or their growth in invaded area starts to rise exponentially, you can save a lot of money. So we've actually quantified in other studies the point along the invasion curve where you can save the most money just based on the invasion trajectory that typically plays out. But these sorts of things are also very context dependent and will depend on individual invasions because they have different spread rates and things like that. But investing earlier is always better.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more. Stephen's curious about to estimate economic impacts of invasive species can obviously be very important for justifying management and either reactive or proactive. What are some of the standard processes that can be used to estimate the economic impacts on a small scale, such as a state or a small region?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's something we've been trying to do for Ireland, which I guess is a bit of a smaller scale, but at the level of synthesis, which is what we've been doing, it really involves doing lots of contacting of individual organizations and trying to request data alongside doing systematic literature reviews to collate cost reporting documents. There's also studies which have looked at the economic cost reporting in languages other than English, which is really important, obviously, in lots of parts of the world where you might not find any economic costs depending on how you search for them. So we've done cost syntheses in, I think, a couple of dozen non-English languages, which have revealed quite a large amount of hidden data that you won't get if you're purely searching, on academic repositories in English. So there's a lot of kind of local tailoring you can do to try and get cost information by using individual languages, but also opportunistic contacting of relevant departments or sectors who might be able to provide costs that you wouldn't otherwise get just by doing kind of a broader search on the internet. So that's one of the key studies we've done through InvoCost and collaborators has been building the database with non-English sources, which added a surprising amount of data to what we found just from English searches.
Wonderful. So join me in again, congratulate. That was a wonderful talk. I am so invested on my side on thinking about the economics. So thank you for that. And InvoCost is such a wonderful resource. There were 2 unanswered questions in the Q&A. So Dr. Cuthbert, if you have a chance, love for you to type in some answers to those 2. But now I think we're going to move into our first break. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks very much for all that. Thanks, everyone.
We're actually going to start our next session. We're going to have a break soon, but not yet. So stick around. And I am Kayla Morningstar. And I'm the research coordinator for Southeast Risk. And I am moderating this session with Nate Hofford at the North Central Risk. And I'm excited to introduce our next session, Management Success Stories, Sustaining Hope During a Time of Transformation. And our session really brings us back to the theme of our conference, which is Better Together, Empowering People in Partnerships. So We work with so much uncertainty, try to control seemingly uncontrollable things in the face of a number of extreme events, searching for support and watching places we love change. So you can sometimes feel like Sisyphus pushing the boulder, and our jobs can be difficult. But for all the difficulties, there's also a lot of hope and positivity to be found. So that's why we're here today. And when we gather to acknowledge and share our victories, it can make it more apparent that what each of us is doing adds up, and together we are changing the world. So our speakers are going to talk about those success stories today, and they're going to do so through 5-minute lightning talks. And then afterward, we're going to have a discussion panel. And so we're going to ask some questions to the panel and then give you a chance to also pose your questions. And if you'd like to do so, please do so in the Q&A at the bottom. Rather than the comments. And so if you're unfamiliar, there's a little black bar at the bottom of your screen. It's going to say Q&A. And Nate and I will be checking that for your questions. And let's see here. And so I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have Patricia Lauro. She is a consultant for the Município de Melgaço in Portugal. And her talk will be cooperation to tackle the invasion of aquatic species Ludwigia peploides. And then we'll have Austin McCloskey, who is a biologist with the Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe. And he's going to talk about tribal action to European green crab removal fuels compost for the community. Then we'll have Brian Tucker, the University of Hawaii Pacific Cooperative Studies Unit. And he's going to talk about managing Ohia death pathogens under a changing climate. We'll have Alexis Mowry from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Their talk is Small Scale Victories Against Large Scale Invasive Plants in a Maryland State Park. And then we'll end our lightning talks with Brian Falk from the U.S. National Invasive Species Council, who's going to talk about reducing invasion risks and U.S. major disasters. So without further ado, Patricia, if you want to take it away. And then for our speakers, I will show up about 1 minute before your talk is over, and then we'll move on to the next speaker.
Okay, hello. Good evening, everyone. So first of all, we congratulate to the organizers of this conference, which is allowing us to share so many important and urgent environmental issues. Well, today I am sharing with you our project. It's called Ludwigia Minho, and it's developed by the municipality of Melgaço in the north of Portugal, with support from the National Environmental Funding and to control the invasion of an aquatic plant. So this is our intervention area in the Minho River at the beginning of its international section between Spain and Portugal, and specifically in these two lagoons. We are talking about a special conservation zone, Natura 2000 network, and this is where we aimed to control the invasion of Ludwigia peploides, known as floating primrose willow. So who is this species? It's native from South and Central America and introduced in Europe in the 19th century as an aquatic ornamental plant, and rapidly spread due to the beauty of its yellow flowers, as you can see. And it grows in calm waters like ponds and lakes and riverbanks, and it also and then on the left you see, and it blooms from July to October, and then the stems fall off around November. So why is it a problem? Well, because it grows rapidly and it forms large amounts of biomass, which hinders light penetration and reduces oxygen. So in this photo in Portugal, we see how it dominated the ecosystem through shading or through competitive exclusion with native plants, because it secretes allelopathic substances that inhibit the growth and germination of other species. So it is obviously a risk to biodiversity, to fishing, navigation, and the recreational use, and also reduces the landscape value. A small fragment, as you can see in the picture on the right, it naturally flows with downstream or it's by transported with nautical activities or by the opening of the dams is enough to generate a new plant. And it also produces seeds that can be spread by animals. So how do we tackle it? Well, we developed training sessions with groups of civil protection, forest sappers, forestry and environmental technicians from the Portuguese and the Spanish municipalities, which we hope will carry on the work after the project lifetime. We also worked closely with the local professional school to engage young people in the activation of a pond with native species, and we also developed informative panels regarding threatened species and a photographic exhibition to reach different audiences. Well, we conducted a lot of field work, removing the plants carefully by hand and to avoid the dispersion of those propagules. And our main challenges, besides the short time for intervention, were these long carpets of roots in the sediment and the high water levels due to the dam discharges and also the rain. Well, we also used a paddleboat to access difficult or sensitive areas. And then the biomass was dried, packed, and transported to municipal facilities to burn. And all the process was monitored. And the regeneration areas that you can see in the invasion areas you see in the red area, and the native plant status you can see in the yellow area, and you can compare May, June, and October. As you can see, there is still a work to do to improve the conservation of the habitat, and that's why we consider essential to provide training to the local technicians. We also gathered regional stakeholders from Portugal and Spain, and they were linked to environmental policies, to the management of the water resources, to the enforcement. We also had NGOs, fishermen, and companies to draw the lines of the action plan based on prevention, early detection, and control of these invasive species. So below you can see the map of occurrence of the floating primrose willow. So we believe that this cooperation and joint action can really contribute to decrease the scattering of the invasive species to other water courses and thus protecting the biodiversity. Well, that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patricia. Let's give a round of applause. And then we will move on to our next talk, and it will be Austin McCloskey talking about European green crabs. So Austin, when you're ready, take the floor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Austin McCloskey. I'm with the Shoalwater Bay Indian Tribe, and today I'm going to be speaking to you about our European green crab removal efforts and how that fueled our compost for the tribal garden. So I want to give you a quick trapping history. Back in 2021, Shoalwater Bay Tribal Council declared an emergency on European green crab as we started seeing more and more crab invading tribal waters. Our Natural Resources Department started speaking with Washington Sea Grant and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife as we discussed the best ways to trap European green crab. And once we started trapping, we were able to streamline the process. In 2023, trapping over 80,000 crabs on tribal waters. And in 2024, we ramped up our removal efforts and ended up trapping over 115,000 crabs. And in 2025, our efforts have been less this year, but we're still trapping over 80,000 crabs and counting as the year comes to an end. With the tribal farm, when it was started, there was very poor soils. The plants were struggling, not producing a whole lot of vegetables, and there was definitely a need for compost. So our agricultural specialist decided that we would give windrows a try, taking the European green crab that we had frozen for 2 days, placing those in the ground and burying them, hoping that they would break down over time and provide those nutrients to the plants on the tribal farm. This, excuse me, this was not a very efficient way of delivering the nutrients directly to the plants. So he decided to start chipping up the frozen European green crab through a wood chipper and mixing that with the wood chips and food scraps that we could collect to start a composting process. And with that process, he was able to streamline that as well and start incorporating compost directly to the plants within the garden. And from that, we saw a lot more fruits and vegetables were being produced from the plants. The overall health of the plants had increased and they were doing a lot better. And we were able to reduce a lot more waste from tribal communities. And maybe one of the most important things was we were able to get rid of the rotten crab smell that was in our office. So since then, this year we've produced over 39 cubic yards of compost. A lot of that gets reincorporated back into the tribal farm for all the growing areas that he has. We still catch thousands of green crab. Our high removal efforts do have an impact short term, but in the long run, there's a large influx of larvae coming from the ocean, and they seem to move right back into the areas that we trap. So we're constantly trying to remove as many crabs as possible and trying different trapping strategies to see if there's any way we can permanently remove crabs from small areas. The farm has also grown over 3,400 pounds of produce in 2025, redistributing that all to tribal members throughout the community. And with all the compost that we produced this year, there has been an overabundance, and we were able to provide compost for tribal members who would like to use that in their own gardens or however they should choose. This process has been very great for us in not only removing invasive species, but also finding a use for them, not just a use that produces something for the tribal community, and promoting food sovereignty while reducing waste. Thank you all for your time. This is a quick picture of where the green crabs go. You got them as they are here in the first picture on the left. In the middle, that is a processed pile of green crab that has just gone through the chipper, and then they're mixed into the wood chips with all the food scraps to start the compost process. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Austin. Let's give him a round of applause. That's a great way to deal with biological waste. I know a lot of us kind of create a lot of that when we're doing species removal. So great talk. All right, and we are going to move on to our next speaker, Brian Tucker from the University of Hawaii. So Brian, if you are ready to share your screen, it is your turn.
Aloha mai kako. You may have heard about Hawaii being the extinction capital of the world or the endangered species capital of the world, and it's no coincidence that it may be considered the invasive species capital of the world, which only seems to be intensifying in the face of our changing climate. While we're more familiar with the more highly visible invasive species of plants and animals that plague our paradise, today I'm going to talk about a microscopic unseen invader that is terribly impacting Hawaii's native forests. Ohia, or Metrosideros polymorpha, is so profoundly important both environmentally and culturally in Hawaii. And we create very detailed infographics to help us understand just how much it impacts our everyday lives throughout these islands. Ohia is the pioneer species on new lava flows and forms the dominant canopy for old growth forests. Our Ohia dominated forests are under attack. This is a high-resolution satellite imagery of an area greatly impacted by rapid ohia death. One can clearly see the difference between healthy and dead canopy. This was vibrant native forest less than a decade ago, except for that adjacent cattle ranching in the lower right, which you see, and yes, that is related. But it's not all doom and gloom. We have a large and dedicated working group of land managers, researchers, specialists, and enablers, and I greatly appreciate everyone who has supported these efforts. Through dedicated research, we figured out a disease cycle for rapid ohia death. It is a non-native vascular wilt disease caused by 2 species of Ceratocystis fungal pathogens, Ceratocystis leucoohea and Ceratocystis huliohea. For the ohia to become infected, there needs to be a wound and inoculation of the wound sites. Then the infected frass is spread and the vicious cycle continues. The vast majority of ambrosia beetles you see are non-native. Not pictured here are non-native invasive hoofed animals like feral pigs and cows that create the trunk wounds and can directly inoculate the wounds they create. So we have this cycle of invasive species culminating in the loss of millions of our keystone species, and climate change is only exacerbating this with increased, more severe storm events and weather trends like drought to make these trees more vulnerable. Also, the increasing temperatures increase ranges of ambrosia beetles to higher elevations. And of course, once the tree is dead, the canopy is open. And in many places, it is not, it is being replaced by non-native species. Again, not all hope is lost. This is the opening slide again. You may notice the dead brown-white canopy skeletons amongst the living trees. Well, notice the block on the left that is predominantly green. This is a fenced area that excludes invasive hoofed animals. We have observed that fence-managed areas have significantly lower mortality than adjacent unfenced areas with populations and predominantly feral pigs in this particular area. We have observed and analyzed this in many locations across Hawaii Island and came up with a clear message of hope. There is an available and effective management strategy to protect our forests from the most devastating impacts of rapid ohia death. This threefold strategy is fencing, invasive hoofed animal removal, and long-term maintenance. We published a story map of these several compelling observations, and I invite you to access that through the QR code. One example is the map on the left, where 99% of the over 3,000 total suspected rod mortality was on the unfenced and unmanaged side. So it's apparent that invasive feral hoofed animals are a key driver in the disease cycle. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brian. That was a great talk. It's great to hear good things when we're talking about ohia death, the rapid ohia death, because I feel like when I hear about it, it does seem, pretty grim. So you're doing great work. Thanks for your time today. Anyone have a question for Brian, please put it in the Q&A at the bottom. And we are going to move on to our next speaker, Alexis Mowry from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources.
Today, I'm going to be talking about some of our efforts that we're doing within a state park in Maryland. So this takes place at Corcoran Environmental Study Area, which is a part of the Sandy Point Complex for any Marylanders out there. So it's a mainly forested area that becomes inundated with vernal pools during the spring and summer. So it's basically a seasonal wetland. Within this area, we put in 43 acres of plantings, which was roughly 20,000 trees in between 2016 and 2020. Those plantings were done in order to address invasive species that were already established there, and then also enhance water quality and habitat. So we still have some problems. Our biggest ones being what are shown here, which are Oriental bittersweet, wineberry, and bamboo. This is an assessment of the space of Corcoran. In 2015, this original assessment was done. before the planting. And as you can see, we've done a revision in 2023. And also, if you've noticed, there's a lot more red and orange. So what actually happened was that a lot of the plantings failed, and a lot of that was due to kind of like a lack of maintenance during COVID times. So, but so we've come in and we've started dealing with some of these invasives that have taken back over. Main one being one of our main ones that we focus on, wineberry. We mainly deal with this using mechanical removal by hand pulling the wineberry and digging out the roots. We do this mainly in the winter. However, we do have an annual event in the summer of like a pick and pull where volunteers come and they will pick out the berries and then they pull up the plant afterwards. So it's a fun way to get volunteers out there. We've had really good success with this, actually. We have been pleasantly surprised with the lack of invasive regrowth. We have noticed a majority of native plant regrowth and only probably around a 5% wineberry regrowth. So that's been really good for us. Our next problem that we mainly deal with is the bamboo. So we have about 6.5 acres of bamboo in Corcoran, and they're really dense stands for the most part. How we treat them is we grab loppers or a handsaw and we cut them close to the ground. And then we will spray the stump with a 20% active ingredient glyphosate mix. And then, so that's a bit of an ongoing battle for us. We have had pretty good results in terms of the bamboo responding to it. The bamboo that does regrow, we then do a foliar 2% glyphosate spray, and that takes about 70% of the time, as we've guesstimated. So that's pretty good response there, really dwindling that down. However, within the new open canopy of the area, we've had a lot less native regrowth and a lot more other invasives come in. So again, more wineberries coming in. We also have a lot of garlic mustard coming in, which is kind of different for us. But luckily, we've had such good success with the wineberry in the past that we're actually really hopeful of this and, expect pretty decent outcomes once we're able to address the wineberry itself. So this is an overall kind of graphic that shows our progress of Corcoran, of the work we've done in Corcoran overall. Started in 2023 in a very small area, and over the years we've been able to expand a lot. So we're a group of only 4 people, actually. It's myself and my coworkers, Victoria Lee, Aaron Collins, and Matt Palmbuena. It's only the 4 of us. We do have volunteers that come in too, but this is just kind of to show the work that a small group of people can do, even in a kind of small amount of time. We only get out there about once a week on average, if even that. So as long as you have that consistent work done, you can actually make decent progress. So that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Alexis. Appreciate it. Really cool, nice success stories there.
We can start that Q&A now. So we'll get all of our speakers together for a panel. We have some questions we're going to pose, and then we'll go to the Q&A as well. So the first question we have here for all of our speakers, what was your biggest collaboration success moment in this project? Do we want to start with Patricia?
Yes, Kayla, I'm here. Well, I would say I would highlight one moment where on a training session, we gathered like 50 people from different Portuguese and Spanish stakeholders, and they were connecting, learning with each other. They were sharing their perspectives on what they figure out it's this invasive species issue. And they were discussing what can be done, what hotspots should be monitored, who would be responsible.
I think we might have lost you, Patricia. Can you repeat what you...
Who else should be involved? And it was really the start to hear me?
Yeah, you cut out a little though. Can you say the last sentence or two that you just said?
Oh, okay. So I was saying that all the stakeholders were together sharing their perspectives and on this invasive species, and they were discussing what can be done and which hotspots could be or should be monitored, and who should be responsible for that, and who else should be getting involved in it. And for us, it was a great accomplishment because for us, it was really the start point for the action plan we want to develop further. And it will be focusing on the prevention, on the early detection and the control of the floating primrose willow. So we believe this is essential to tackle the invasion and also for future work. So I would highlight this gathering moment.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. What about you, Austin? Is there a moment for you that you can think of?
Yeah. So we've had a lot of collaboration with European green crab with organizations all over the state, and a lot of different organizations within Willapa Bay. But I think probably the most exciting one was within our own tribe with our agricultural specialist taking green crab from an invasive species to a compost that can actually produce something for the tribe, and then getting to not only develop that process but see it to the end and see how it actually produces something was really awesome and fun for us to see.
Thank you for sharing that. And then just to pose the question again, what was your biggest collaboration success moment in the project? And Brian, do you want to share one?
Yeah, I mean, collaboration, itself is a big victory when you can make it happen. We have our partners are federal, state, local, you have land managers, researchers, and so getting everyone on the same page can be tricky. And yeah, I think getting researchers to share their work and share their process before publishing can be a big deal. And because we have this really strong focus, strong buy-in to this group, and it's really a wonderful group. I can't state that enough. We're able to do these things and figure out in a relatively short amount of time what the problem is, and making these observations and coming up with solutions, and pushing funding toward those solutions.
Thank you, Brian. What about you, Alexis? Is there a collaboration moment you can think of to share?
I mean, basically, our whole work that we do there can't be done without more collaboration. And our biggest collaborators would probably be the Maryland Conservation Corps, its program, AmeriCorps-based program throughout the state. And they're based at different state parks. And we have them come, and they are a huge help to us. We've been able to get an additional 15, 20 people out there at times to be able to help out. And so they're a real big help to us.
Well, I'm going to ask another question then. What are some strategies or tools that changed what you thought was possible? And did this change future workflows and other projects for you that you're working on? And then we'll kind of go in the same order. Patricia, if you'd like to address it.
Oh, okay. Well, invasive species isn't the most interesting issue from the political point of view in general. So on the first training session, we had really a small audience, and we were disappointed by that, and we had to rethink the next session. So we decided to first do a lot of field work, and also to publish on social media, have some news coming up on social communication, let people get more familiar with the project achievements. And then a few months later, we started a new round of invitations to the stakeholders from Portugal and Spain. And then we included a a participatory moment. We used this method, the World Cafe, which is a structured conversational process that fosters open dialogue and collaborative discussion amongst the participants. So they get to explore the different perspectives on a topic, no? And so this meeting for us came up great, and from then on we moved to the action plan, and this is what I think I would say it was the strategy that we applied.
Great, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, the World Cafe can be great.
Yeah.
Austin, do you wanna share?
Yeah, I wish I could have shared a little bit more detail in the presentation because it's hard to fit everything into 5 minutes. But yeah, so when we started trapping, we were using all kinds of different types of traps, and we went through a long process of really narrowing that down to one that could efficiently capture crabs without throwing more traps than what we needed. So definitely building some different strategies there and gear and what we use. And then, yeah, definitely gave us that's kind of what fueled our idea for moving green crab into compost, because we were capturing all this crab and it's like, what do you do with all these? There's not really a use for them right now. So I think that was a huge success, seeing or being able to take different strategies and apply those to our trapping style and work that into a green crab solution.
Makes sense. Yeah, great. And then Brian?
Yeah, for us, it was, just high resolution satellite imagery being available and more readily available because you can see, these crowns from space, and when you zoom in, and so you can better monitor, and it provides another method of surveying instead of all manually, like getting up and doing helicopter surveys, which has a lot of safety risks and a lot of it's quite expensive to do. And so going from just having these manual fly above, view everything, or on the ground notice things type of thing, to have this view from space, and this continual process over time to be able to see that and track the changes going on in the landscape. And it helps us target where to go for our research and our management, and it just has supported so many workflows.
Yeah, I bet that's something that I wouldn't have even thought of as an aquatics person. But yeah, those satellite images being updated. What about you, Alexis? Is there something you want to share?
Could I actually have you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me pull it up. And so what lessons? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. What are some strategies or tools that changed the way that you thought, that changed what you thought was possible? And did this change future workflows and other projects that you're working on? So strategies.
Yeah. Our strategy hasn't changed too much since we started. We've gotten a little bit better at our data collection and tracking our progress, which is always great. We use our GIS field maps for that. But really the biggest thing that I think has been the biggest help for us is just solidifying our connections and who we can go to and ask for help from. And then also just figuring out which tools actually work best for what. Because sometimes, you hear all these fancy ways to deal with different invasive plants and whatnot, and you're like, oh, let me try that. Sometimes simple is just better. So I think that's kind of been the big things for us.
Great. So I'm gonna pop into the Q&A now and get some questions from our audience. So the first one's going to be for Brian Tucker. I'm going to read two. One is just kind of a thank you for mentioning that the pathogens that cause ROD are also considered invasive, because they think that that's not often communicated. And then someone was wondering, how far can an ambrosia beetle fly, and would the spread of the fungus slow or stop if there was a treeless buffer in addition to the fencing?
Well, I would think, well, first, thanks for the great question. We've had these talks about ambrosia beetles, and there's a lot of different research that's been done out there, and a lot of differing opinions on or research done on what their ranges are. So that is an area that our team is looking into to find out, you know, the ranges, and there's variability among the different species of ambrosia beetles as well. But as far as a treeless buffer, I think that treeless buffer would have to be so big that you would be losing so much forest, and I don't think that would be in anyone's best interest. What we have found through research and what we can do is a product that it's basically repels beetles that you can apply to a dead tree, and so you know, you can put that and it'll do that. It's a beetle repellent, and so if there is an individual tree or just a small grouping of trees in a new breakout area, this can help reduce that incursion of frass into the environment.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Now we're going to go back to another question that's going to be addressed toward all of our panelists. What lessons have you learned from coordination under pressure, and what lessons can you share about working effectively under pressure? And then we'll start with Patricia again, if that's...
Okay. Well, my video is off, but I can't put it on. But, well, I think coordination under pressure is really tricky because you can't afford to lose focus, especially when we are on a project. We know that the clock is running, and at the same time, we need to deal with lots of unexpected things like team delays or technical problems or bad weather or I don't know, the high water level. And at the same time, we know that the natural processes don't perfectly match the timing of our project. So it can be a bit frustrating sometimes. But I think what can help is like being present in the moment and observe what is going on, question what are the needs, what can be done in a different way of what we thought. So basically, I would say like try to see an opportunity in a difficulty.
Great point. Austin, do you want to go next?
Yeah. So some lessons we learned. We work with a lot of different organizations within the Bay, and we always have meetings with each other to collaborate on trapping areas within the Bay to make sure that we are doing everything we can to reduce the European green crab population. Some lessons we learned from that, it really helps us having systems put in place, whether that's for trapping or composting, just so when anything comes up, we know we have specific timelines that we can apply to whatever questions someone's asking and tell them we will be doing this much work at these times. And it really helps us provide a lot of answers for people.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I think that Brian Tucker is next.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be understated how the pressure feels when you are seeing the forest die around you in real time and think of all the implications that have. Um, and so, you know, knowing that and knowing that research projects take time, you know, when you want to fund new projects or new projects, getting funding for them can take time. You know, all of these factors, and you know, you want to do everything right here and right now. And so, yeah, what Patricia brought up about staying present is very important. Yeah, just being here now, doing the best with what you got, and keep moving forward, because there are a lot of obstacles that come up that are, you know, beyond what we can anticipate or do that. And yeah, it's and you said that in the for your last question, Brian, with NISC, be kind to each other, you know, in our groups, because you know those emotions can start to, you know, really heat up, and they heat up within each of us in our tasks. And when something is not going as fast as we want, we often feel that, and it can bubble over. But yeah, we can we don't need to add to the stresses we're already faced with.
Great point, Brian. Thank you. And Alexis, do you have anything to share?
Yeah, I mean, second and third, some of the other stuff, like be kind to others, be kind to yourself on problems like this, and everything you're going through with them, and stay present in the moment. Don't forget to take time to actually properly prepare. Like, I know that sounds kind of silly, but if you're so caught up in the moment, you're like, let's just do. But and on that note though, is like for us, like take advantage of time when you have it. Like for us, if we have half a day, that can be, you know, that's an extra 4 hours of work right there. Why not just pop over and go do something? So yeah, just take advantage of the time when you have it.
Great point. And we have just a few minutes left. So to end our panel session today, I wanted to pose a question that kind of brings us back to our theme. So we've heard a little bit about your work today and got to ask you some questions. It's great to hear successes, especially all of us. You know, sometimes it can be really difficult to do what we do. So invasive species work can feel endless. What keeps you and your partners motivated? Can everybody just quickly, maybe a couple of sentences about what keeps them motivated? Patricia, do you want to start us off?
Okay, yeah. Well, it can feel sometimes pointless that we are working like us on a small area, few partners and some financial constraints sometimes. But I think if we are able to see beyond that and look at the global biodiversity picture, where every action is valuable, and we realize that many people like us around the world are giving their best. The universities, the companies, the NGOs, and the governments. So it's really motivating to overcome those feelings of endless or useless work and reassure that we are indeed effectively contributing to change the environmental degradation.
Thank you, Patricia. It's great to remember. Austin, what about you?
So I would say knowing how many crabs that we are removing from the water, thinking about what would happen if we weren't doing that and how many crabs would be in the ecosystem is definitely encouraging to me, knowing that we're removing so many, helping to, at the very least, slow the invasion of green crab and taking over that ecosystem, and preventing whatever erosion they're causing along the banks with their burrowing into the bank. That's definitely encouraging to me. And then knowing that we're taking invasive species and turning them into something that can be utilized by the tribe is definitely encouraging for us.
Yes, it was a great story to hear about. Thank you very much. And then what about you, Brian Tucker?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how we cope here in Hawaii, to be honest. I think it just something kicks in where, you know, when you're faced with so many invasive species coming, you know, and there's these very complex interactions, and we're being faced with these brutally sad, you know, extinction events and everything, you know, just something kicks in, and it's really just there's such a passion for you know, these special species here in this special place that we have. And so I think it's all just kind of inherent, and it attracts the right people to this place to just keep on, because there's really no other choice. You know, and those of us who take on that sense of responsibility, or kuleana as it's called here, we just go, and that's how we do.
Well, we're all very grateful for that. What about you, Alexis?
Yeah, sometimes it is kind of like a, if we don't do it, who will sort of situation. And sometimes, at least when we're physically either taking something out or putting something in, it's quite literally just like looking back and being like, wow, we did that. Like that can be a really big motivator for us, and that can be really helpful. Also just keeping track of like what we do throughout the year. We have like a whole metrics sheet that we have, and be like, oh, we planted, 2,000 trees this year, and we cleared, 5 acres, or whatever it might be. Stuff like that can always be a really big motivator.
It's definitely good to look back and see what you've done. I hope that everyone celebrates their little moments and their victories, especially when the work is a grind sometimes. And thank you all so much for talking to us today. And so if we could give a little round of applause for our panelists, a little virtual applause. We appreciate you all very much in the time that you've given. And we're going to take a little break now. And then I think we're going to follow up with another interactive session.
Amazing. Awesome. Really glad we're able to go into the break with some mostly optimistic and inspiring messages from our panelists.
Coming to you live from the 2nd Annual International Invasive Species and Climate Change Conference, and modeled after the National Public Radio News Quiz and the NASEMA Invasive Species Edition. This is, wait, don't tell me, it's another invasive species, ISK edition. And in case you don't think invasive species are funny, just wait till you hear our jokes. I'm the voice so soothing even invasive species feel compelled to self-report. Paul Evans. I'm your announcer, scorekeeper, and believe me when I tell you I keep scores. I once tried to count all the Burmese pythons in the Everglades. Let's just say they're still winning. And your host in this fine NASEMA Zoom webinar auditorium, I hear he's a runner, but can he run fast enough to keep up with climate change? It's Pacific Risks Specialist, Elliot Parsons.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. Yes, thank you all so much. We had a great show for you here today. We are so glad to be doing our show here virtually at the 2nd Annual ISK. This is the game show where you must separate fact from fiction, invasive from non-invasive, and good jokes from really bad ones. And there are likely to be a lot of those. But before we get going, a reminder that the end of 2025 is coming up soon, and you only have 21 days to come up with your list of New Year's resolutions. I, for one, will be resolving to, show up less uninvited, spread fewer questionable ideas, and definitely stop hitchhiking on people's boots. But enough about me. Let's welcome our first listener contestant. Welcome to Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's another invasive species ISK edition.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell us where you're from?
Yes, Wesley Daniel from Gainesville, Florida, part of the Southeast Risk.
Well, thank you for joining us. You probably spend half your day dodging iguanas on the sidewalks and the other half counting Burmese pythons in your backyard, and you somehow still found time to join our quiz. And what might I ask you do there?
I'm a supervisory fisheries biologist with USGS, and I coordinate the non-indigenous aquatic species database that does count all the non-native aquatic species for the entire US.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You sound like the perfect person to be playing our quiz. Let me introduce you to the panel that you'll be playing with this week. First up, she hails from one of the invasive species capitals of the US. And thank goodness this is a virtual event, so we don't need to worry about any inadvertent introductions, I hope. She is the research coordinator for the Southeast Risk Group, and she studies invasive reptiles so much that when she goes hiking, even the native lizards file paperwork before approaching her. She works on invasive snakes too, so if you hear any rustling during today's quiz, don't worry, it's probably just her taking notes. Probably. Let's welcome Kayla Morningstar.
Hi, listeners. Hi, Wes.
Hi, Kayla.
Next up is someone who originally set her sights on Mars, but decided invasive species on Earth were far more interesting. She's now a professor of biogeography and spatial ecology at UMass Amherst, co-director of the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, and a founder of the Risk Network. I've heard she does climate invasion risk assessments so well that the National Weather Service is considering a new alert category, partly sunny with a high chance of knotweed. It's Dr. Bethany Bradley.
Hi, Wes.
Hi, Bethany.
And we are delighted here as well to welcome to our show our third and final panelist. She's a researcher, the deputy director of the Environmental Data Science Innovation and Impact Lab, and founder of the North Central Risk Network. She studies the relationship between invasive grass and wildfire, which means she's the only person here who can look at a landscape and say with confidence, yep, that patch of cheatgrass is definitely planning something. It's Dr. Chelsea Nagy.
Hi, Wes.
Hi, Chelsea.
Well, Wes, welcome to the show. You're going to play Who's Paul this time. Paul Evans is going to read you 4 quotations from recent invasive species news, and if you can correctly identify or explain just 2 of them, you will win our prize. Now, ordinarily, we would offer you any of our voices on your home answering machine, but let's be honest, nobody has had a home answering machine for a long, long time. If you do still have one, please check it for zebra mussels. They get into everything. Paul, can you let Wes know what he's playing for?
I sure can. Just for you, we are offering this digital image of invasive green crabs because nothing says congratulations, you're a winner, like a swarm of enormous angry crabs chasing you down the beach.
And remember, Wes, when your coworkers ask why you have a giant photo of green crabs over your desk, just tell them it's your emotional support invasion. All right, Wes, are you ready to go?
Let's do it.
Okay, your first quote is from a recent article in Science Daily about the amazing changes happening recently in Yosemite National Park. Paul will read your quote, and the mic will go next to Bethany, who will read your 3 options.
Quote 1. We started to hear other native frogs call and see native salamanders walking around. It's nice to be able to go back to these sites and hear a chorus of native frogs calling again that previously would not have been heard.
So, Wes, does this refer to what happened after A, a massive reintroduction effort where wildlife enthusiasts restocked wetlands using native frogs donated by pet shops across the western US? B, the removal of invasive bullfrogs from Yosemite National Park, which allowed native frogs and salamanders to return and finally be heard again? Or is it C, a Canadian rock band called the Carpet Frogs performing at Yosemite Lodge, whose nature sound-infused set, featuring real frog mating calls, accidentally summoned a full amphibian chorus?
I really would love it to be C with the Canadian frogs, but knowing how impactful bullfrogs are, I'm going to say it's B.
That is right. You are correct. The answer was B. The bullfrogs were kicked out, proving that even Yosemite sometimes has to evict loud, uninvited campers. You get 1 point.
And yes, this actually happened. Researchers at UC Davis found that invasive American bullfrogs were overwhelming Yosemite's ponds, eating young native turtles, drowning out native frog calls, and generally acting like the loud neighbors nobody asked for. After a multi-year effort to remove bullfrogs, northwestern pond turtle, California's only native freshwater turtle, began to rebound, with juveniles appearing again for the first time in years. As it happens, the ecosystem couldn't recover until the bullfrogs finally croaked, proving that sometimes nature really is just waiting for the punchline. Okay, moving on to the second one. Again, Paul will read the quote and Kayla will present you with 3 options to choose the correct story from. Here is your next quote from a recent Newcastle University article.
Quote 2. Our analysis revealed that public discussions disproportionately focus on animals, while invasive plants receive comparatively little attention.
Okay, Wes. Does this refer to A, a Smithsonian review of public discussions around Sir David Attenborough's documentaries that found invasive plants receive roughly the same level of attention as background moss? Or B, an invasive plant scientist presenting at the annual Invasive Plant Fine Art Convention, the IPFAC, expressing frustration that lionfish get the fan art while the invasive weeds can't even get a pity hashtag? Or is it C, a study that evaluated more than 500,000 tweets on X, formerly known as Twitter, between 2006 and 2021, finding that the public overwhelmingly prefers tweeting about charismatic animals instead of the invasive plants quietly plotting ecological domination?
Ooh. Well, Kayla knows our botanist, Ian, and he deals with this all the time, that animal bias. I'm going to go with the tweet and X. I'm going to go with C.
Oh, nope, that is correct. The answer was C. The 500,000 tweets study, finally proving that invasive plants can dominate ecosystems, but not the algorithm. You now have 2 points.
Yes, this research article is out recently. A new study published in Ecology and Society analyzed more than 500,000 tweets about invasive species and found a clear pattern. People overwhelmingly tweet about charismatic animals, cats, pigs, squirrels, even Pablo Escobar's rogue hippos, while ecologically harmful invasive plants barely register in the conversation. Researchers from the University of Galway and Newcastle University call this plant blindness, noting that plants make up most endangered species that receive only a sliver of public attention and conservation funding. Apparently, invasive plants aren't just spreading unnoticed in real life. They're also the only organisms on X that still can't get any followers. And for your final quote, after Paul reads the quote, Chelsea will present you with 3 options, only one of which is true. This is your last question. Are you sure you're ready?
Let's do it.
From a recent article in The Independent.
They're a huge menace. They're trifids. They are one of the biggest threats to our temperate rainforests, and there needs to be a nationwide program to eradicate them.
Okay, Wes, is this in reference to invasive Rhododendron ponticum, a beautiful flowering shrub originally planted for its charm, now spreading like a botanical horde through the last remaining temperate rainforests of the UK, smothering native plants and giving foresters nightmares? B, the nutria, a large semi-aquatic rodent from South America that has recently invaded the temperate rainforests of Washington, gnawing through ecosystems and leaving the locals muttering about swamp rats on steroids. Or C, the signal crayfish, a western U.S. freshwater crayfish that somehow made it to Alaska's temperate rainforests, irritating gold panners and anyone hoping for a peaceful dip in the streams.
Well, I'm going to use context to answer this one, and knowing where nutria live and signal crayfish, I'm going to go with A and say it's our terrestrial plant counterpart.
That is the correct answer. And as I've always suspected, we have to watch out for roadies. But now I have evidence that is clear and sure. Congrats, you're at 3 points.
Yes, Rhododendron puticum, once a beloved Victorian garden favorite, has become one of UK's most aggressive invasive plants, choking out native trees, blanketing the forest floor, and turning temperate rainforests into floral monocultures. Across Wales, Scotland, and pockets of England, this fast-growing shrub is leaving bare earth behind its brilliant pink and purple blooms, reducing biodiversity, making it nearly impossible for native seedlings to reach the light. Conservationists are warning that if left unchecked, these beautiful murder bushes could turn the last remaining temperate rainforest into rhododendron-themed mazes. Paul, how did Wes do in our quiz?
Wes, you got 3 out of 3, which makes you a winner. Wes, you have won a stunning digital image of invasive green crabs, ideally for hanging in your office if you want your coworkers to quietly whisper, wow, they've really committed to this whole marine ecological collapse aesthetic.
Thank you so much for playing our quiz, Wes. Goodbye. And now on to our next game, Bluff the Listener, where the name of the game is to tell fact from fiction. At this time, we would like to call our next listener contestant to join us in the Zoom webinar auditorium. Welcome to Wait Don't Tell Me It's Another Invasive Species ISK edition.
I'm so excited to be here.
Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Hi, I'm Allie Putnam. I'm a marine invasion ecologist, and I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and on the leadership team of the Northeast Risk. And I've always wanted to be on this show.
That is great to hear. So are you calling in from somewhere in Western Mass?
Yes, as a marine ecologist, Western Mass, where I'm surrounded by land, is the most appropriate place for me to study invasive marine organisms.
Gotcha. My dad is from Massachusetts, and that's also not too far from Salem, Massachusetts, which I hear is famous for ghosts. Do you believe in ghosts as well as invasive species?
I do, and right now we're dealing with a new invasive clam in Salem, so now we're dealing with clams and ghosts. It's a scary place to be.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sally. We are inviting you here to play a game we are calling
Something Fishy and Slow.
For 2 different questions, our panelists will read 3 news stories drawn from recent news headlines, but only one of them is true. You must get at least 1 correct answer out of the 2 questions in order to win our prize. Paul, what kind of prize is our contestant playing for?
For you today, Allie, we are offering this digital guide to wildflowers at full speed. Think of it as the only field guide where every flower is accurately identified as, probably yellow.
And finally, a field guide that matches my real-world experience. When I'm out looking for invasives, everything native is subtle and delicate, and the invasives are just that huge streak of color taking over the frame. All right, Allie, are you ready?
I'm super ready.
One of the following is a true story about pathways of invasive species introduction. The first story is brought to you by our very own panelist, Bethany Bradley.
Okay, Allie, we've all heard of and perhaps been terrorized by the infamous Hollywood movie Sharknado. But did you know about lion fishicane? In September 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico with wind speeds of up to 150 miles per hour. When Sebastian Rivera returned to his home after the hurricane, he was lucky to find that his house was still standing, but his swimming pool had been flooded with ocean water. Happily living in the salty waters were over a dozen invasive lionfish. Said Rivera, I recognize them as invasive lionfish because they're all over our reefs, so I knew not to touch them. With the help of a neighbor and a tarp, Rivera was able to corral the fish. Electricity was still out, but according to Rivera, we had plenty of firewood and we found a cookbook about eating our invasive species, so we had a big neighborhood barbecue. Rivera later said the whole thing brought the community together, proving once again that nothing strengthens neighborhood bonds like a shared natural disaster and an invasive species entree.
All right, is it invasive lionfish or is the true story the next one by Chelsea?
Some of the most expensive aquarium fish in the world are rare tropical fish, and those were exactly the kind of sea creatures that Sharon Naismith tried to traffic into Australia in June 2005. According to NBC News, while Naismith underwent an inspection upon arriving from Singapore in Australia via the Melbourne airport, some of the customs officers working reported hearing flipping sounds that appeared to be emanating from underneath the traveler's clothes. A search yielded the source of those weird noises. Naismith had installed a purpose-built apron beneath her skirt that held 15 plastic bags all filled with water. Inside of them were 51 fish, including 14 catfish, and an exceedingly precious and endangered Asian arowana valued at around $30,000. After customs agents searched Naismith's home and found 5 more fish, she was charged with attempting to import regulated wildlife. Experts say the scheme was doomed from the start. After all, it's hard to keep a low profile when your fashion statement keeps flipping out.
All right, it could be invasive lionfish or someone's attempt to transport fish in a specially built aquatic apron. Or the true story could be the next one from Kayla.
We've all heard of people releasing goldfish into ponds when they get too big, which is already optimistic thinking for a species that tops out at could still fit in a lunchbox. But in Argentina, some people took the pet trade to a whole new level and accidentally created the carpocalypse. In 2022, after a record-breaking heat wave in Rosario, Argentina, officials responding to reports of an odd orange color in the Paraná River found something they did not expect: a thriving school of giant koi and ornamental carp. After some investigation, officials discovered that local hobbyists had been releasing their aging aquarium carp into the river for years, assuming that the cold waters would lull them into an eternal sleep. And they were right until the climate stopped cooperating. According to Argentina's National Carp Management Plan, warming waters had turned the river into a perfect spa resort for carp, allowing them to survive the winters and regain their youthful appetites. One resident said, "I thought I saw my old koi, Senor Wiggles, but he'd gotten so big I wasn't sure if I should feed him, ride him, or register him as livestock."
So, Allie, is it story number 1, invasive lionfish in the swimming pool? Story number 2, the Australian fish smuggler? Or story 3, the river runs orange with carp?
Well, so I'm an invertebrate and seaweed biologist, so if I get this wrong about the fish, it's not my fault. I think lionfish in the pool sound like that could really happen, and I hope they had a good barbecue.
And unfortunately, you did not guess correctly. The answer was B, the Australian fish smuggler. But there is one more chance to win our prize. Think of it as like invasive species management. You may not get them all the first time, but hey, there's always the next one or the one after that.
Luckily, we were able to find someone with real knowledge of this event, at least what they were able to find out from an online article.
Okay, so according to the headline in the Sydney Morning Herald, Sharon Naismith failed to skirt customs and was sentenced to 9 months of community service. Honestly, it's the first time in history someone tried to start a fashion trend that was literally tanking.
All right, time for question number 2. One of the following is a true story about how climate change may be shifting the pathways of invasion for some lucky species. We'll turn it over to our very own panelist, Kayla, for story number 1.
In 2023, a Danish cargo ship became the first container vessel to cruise through the rapidly melting Northwest Passage in the late summer without an icebreaker escort. But when the ship reached Kodiak, Alaska, port inspectors noticed something unusual stuck to the seawater intake screens. Over 200 live European green crabs, one of the world's worst coastal invaders and the unofficial mascot of "Oh no, not these guys again." Noah later explained the plot twist. The ship had taken on ballast water in Reykjavik during an unusual August heat wave, which kept the water warm enough for the crabs to survive the entire 12-day Arctic journey, something that would have been unthinkable a decade ago, but when the Northwest Passage was basically a giant freezer. One inspector admitted the crabs were remarkably feisty, adding, "Honestly, it's impressive. These things survived a week-long cruise through the Arctic. Meanwhile, most of us can't survive a 3-hour ferry ride without Dramamine." In the end, the crabs didn't shift their range. Climate change just rolled out a red carpet and said, "There's your shortcut, buddy."
Is it green crabs hitchhiking a ride through the Arctic? It could be, or the correct answer could be this next story from Bethany.
In 2022, customs officials at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport intercepted one of the stranger invasive species threats they had ever encountered. A traveler returning from a wedding in Lagos declared a slightly wilted houseplant cutting wrapped in moist soil. Nothing suspicious, except that during inspection, officers heard faint munching sounds coming from the root ball, which is never on the list of noises you want a plant to make. A quick X-ray revealed the culprits. 6 juvenile giant African land snails burrowed inside the soil like they were on a long-haul vacation package. The juvenile snails survived because the plant was wrapped in several layers of damp fabric, creating what one inspector described as the world's smallest, sweatiest greenhouse. All 6 snails were confiscated, the now rootless plant was destroyed, and the traveler was fined. Officials said he was surprised but cooperative, reportedly explaining that the snails weren't his pets exactly, but he had named them Gary, Turbo, Michelle, Shelley, Lord Slimington, and Beyonce, just in case. As one inspector put it afterward, "Look, if your houseplant has roommates, that's not luggage, it's habitat."
It could be a houseplant harboring giant African snails, or the correct answer could be our last story from Chelsea.
All right, let me tell you about a story about a silent invasion that almost nobody noticed, probably because it didn't involve helicopters, harpoons, or anyone hiding fish in their underwear. But between 2015 and 2024, researchers in the southeastern US began spotting something odd: tropical invasive plants, the kind usually stuck in Florida with giant mosquitoes and questionable billboards, were creeping farther north. Did someone smuggle them in a suitcase? Did a rogue garden gnome orchestrate a botanical uprising? Nope, the winters just got warmer. A 2023 analysis showed that milder winters are reducing freeze mortality for many cold-sensitive invasive species. Suddenly, plants that once shriveled at the idea of a Georgia cold snap were surviving like they'd checked into a Miami spa. Monitoring data from state agencies and EDMAPs showed several of these species expanding where hard freezes used to stop them. One land manager joked they might as well hand their planting zone maps to the climate and say, "Here, you draw them."
So, Allie, is it story number 1, green crabs on an Arctic cruise, story 2, giant snails in the luggage, or story 3, invasive plants leaving the tropics?
I would love to hear a land snail chomping as described in that story, but I think it might be story number 3.
You got that right. The answer is C, invasive plants leaving the tropics. That means you are at 1 point, and at this point, you're creeping up the scoreboard the same way those tropical plants are creeping up the southeast.
Luckily, we were able to find someone with real knowledge of this event. In other words, they carefully scrutinized an online article and are here today to share with you a little more about what actually happened.
A major USGS-led study found that warming winters, especially the shrinking number of hard freezes, are allowing cold-sensitive tropical species to push north from Florida into the rest of the southeast. By analyzing temperature records and species occurrence data, the researchers identified dozens of tropical invasive plants with clear freeze mortality thresholds that are now being crossed less often, opening the door for range expansion. The big takeaway? Even tiny shifts in winter cold can turn coastal areas into invasion hotspots, so managers in Georgia and the Carolinas might want to brace themselves because Florida's invasive plants are already packing their bags.
Paul, was this enough to win our prize?
Allie, you scored 1 out of 2, which makes you a winner. You have won our prize, a digital guide to roadside wildflowers at full speed. Finally, there's a botanical guide for people who enjoy wildflowers but refuse to slow down enough to actually see them. We will send it to you by email. We totally promise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allie, for playing our quiz. Goodbye. In just a minute, we're going to ask our panelists to predict what will be the next invasive species we all need to worry about in a changing climate. But first, let me tell you that Wait, Don't Tell Me It's Another Invasive Species ISC Edition is a production of the Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Networks in association with NASMA Zoom Webinar Productions and inspired by the National Public Radio's Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR News Quiz. We'd like to thank our panelists, Bethany Bradley, Chelsea Nagy, and Kayla Morningstar. Our judge and scorekeeper, Paul Evans. Our listener contestants, Wes Daniel and Allie Putnam, our planning committee, and all of our families for putting up with us during the planning of this game show. We thank our sound and audio engineer, Nate Hofford, with the North Central Risk, and Bartica.com for our digital soundboard. Tegan Wilmot, the NASMA Education and Prevention Manager, and NASMA Executive Director, Christy Trifone Millhouse, for making this webinar possible. And finally, a big thank you to Kate Wilson, Russ Hartzell, and the entire 2025 NASMA Wait, Don't Tell Me Invasive Species Edition team who helped inspire this ISC edition and provided their expertise to get us going. It would not have happened without all of your support. Now, panel, what will be the next invasive species we need to worry about in a changing climate? Bethany?
Given an increasing focus in the United States on purported cover-ups of UFO sightings, the next species we'll have to worry about are actual space aliens.
Kayla?
Space aliens, or maybe something already close to home. I bet the next invader will look cute, but end up being a total ecosystem chaos agent. We should start a prevention campaign now. Don't release your labubus.
That's fantastic. Chelsea?
My prediction? Climate-fueled hybrid invaders. You know, like a cross between a feral hog and kudzu. Something that eats your crops and grows over your car while doing it. Biologists will call it a super pest, and insurance companies will call it not covered.
Well, if any of that happens, we will ask you about it on Wait, Don't Tell Me It's Another Invasive Species. And when it does, we reserve the right to say we warned you in the most scientifically smug tone possible. Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you again next year. This is the ISC.
Okay, that was amazing. I don't know how I'm gonna follow that. Okay, everyone, thank you so much for hanging in there. Thank you so much to Elliot Parsons and the Wait, Don't Tell Me Invasive Edition segment. Amazing. But stay in here. We've got only a little over an hour in our program for these 2 days. We're so glad you're here. And our last session before the closing is here, Emerging Insights from Early Career Scientists. We're so lucky to have 5 folks to tell us about the work they're doing, and we're going to kick it right off with Matt Fortakos. I'm really lucky to be able to work with Matt at the Northeast Risk and the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. If you don't remember, I'm Tony Lynn Morelli, co-founder of the Risk Network and a research ecologist with the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center at the USGS. And I'm just going to hand it right over to you, Matt, to take it away.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. That's definitely, I agree with Tony Lynn, a tough act to follow, but hopefully you find some enjoyment from this as well. So yeah, I'm excited to be here to talk a bit about the links between the ornamental plant trade in the United States and the invasions that we see today. So we know that over half of invasive plants established in the United States today were introduced through the ornamental plant trade. And this is based off of the introduction pathways for about 1,000 different invasive plants that are in the United States today. And we also know that the ornamental plant trade in the US is very well documented, with catalogs over the previous centuries stored in natural history collections across the country, making it an excellent study system to test the effects of propagule pressure on different stages of plant invasion. So an example of one of these horticultural catalogs can be seen on the left from 1902. So if we had a database which documented all of these offerings from the ornamental trade over space and time, it would allow us to better answer questions about different invasion dynamics. So I made this data set called the Historical Plant Sales Database, which tracks historical nursery records from the conterminous United States, specifically to test the role of propagule pressure on plant establishment and invasion success at the continental scale. So for only non-native species, this data set contains over 1.5 million records representing over 11,000 different species spanning around 1,900 unique cities from 1719 to 1978. And there's a map on the right side of the screen there showing that distribution spatially. And of the 11,408 species in our data set, we categorized about 8,800 introduced species, 1,669 established species, and 933 invasive species. So you can imagine that all of these different places selling non-native plants would create endless propagules released into the local environment. So for some more background on how propagules from the ornamental plant trade relate to invasions, a quick definition is that propagule pressure is the frequency and extent of species introductions and is one metric of introduction history that's been proposed as a primary driver of biological invasion. So with higher propagule pressure or the number of introductions on the x-axis here, you might expect a higher likelihood of invasion, so increasing slant there. So many past studies of propagule pressure often do not separate invasion into its three stages, which include introduction when a non-native species is released outside its native range, establishment when a non-native species achieves a self-sustaining population, and invasion when an established species spreads, increases in abundance, and has negative impacts. Many studies also only focus on the introduction to establishment stages of invasion, yet still draw conclusions of its effect on that invasive stage when there's actually those negative impacts. So as a result, it can be challenging to parse whether propagule pressure affects invasions by increasing that likelihood of establishment, leading to more non-native populations that could become invasive, or by increasing the likelihood of both the establishment and the invasion stages, leading to more established non-native populations that are also more likely to become invasive. So the effects of propagule pressure also are likely to differ between the transitions of each stage. So abiotic factors tend to be more important between the introduction and establishment stage, which is when species that are pre-adapted to environmental conditions are more likely to make it through and successfully establish. So walking through how this works in this figure here, each plant symbol in this figure represents a species introduced with the same number of propagules. So we can see that the bamboo, the flower, and the tree have successfully made it through the abiotic barriers to establishment, while that green vine and the cactus have not. So the green vine and the cactus would be what would be considered failed introductions because they failed to establish. But in theory, with enough propagules, the abiotic barriers to establishment could be overcome. So here you can see that with more propagules, the green vine was able to successfully make it through those abiotic barriers and actually establish in the landscape. And this occurs because higher propagule pressure could expose a species to a wider array of suitable environmental conditions, or it could increase the genetic diversity of a population, allowing for increased adaptive capacity and leading to a higher likelihood of establishment. But the question remains, can this initial propagule pressure also affect a species' ability to move from the establishment stage to the invasive stage? So the invasive stage is thought to be governed largely by biotic traits and interactions with other species, especially at local scales. So as you can see in the image, the bamboo was able to overcome the biotic barriers from establishment to invasion, and subsequently became invasive, meaning it spread to negative impacts, while the tree, flower, and the green vine failed to invade but are still considered established. So what does our data set say for the relationship between propagule pressure from ornamental sales and invasion? So this here is a descriptive box plot of the data set separated by species in each stage of invasion. Noting on the x-axis it is in the log scale, and that's our propagule pressure metrics, or basically the number of locations or nurseries that a species was sold. And the plot shows that introduced species, which are in blue, are more often sold at fewer locations than established or invasive species. And this is also confirmed by a statistical comparison of their means. So introduced species were sold at significantly fewer locations than established species. Similarly, established species, which are in yellow, had significantly lower propagule pressure than invasive species, but propagule pressure of these species appear more similar than introduced species, which is lower. So introduced species were offered at an average of 9 locations overall, established species at an average of 49 locations, and invasive species at an average of 59 locations, emphasizing this difference over the entire temporal and spatial scale of the data set. So the plots I just showed display that propagule pressure is significant in discerning these different stages of invasion, but how well does it actually perform as a predictor of establishment and of invasions? This is especially important as we try to predict future invasions. So can we predict what will become invasive based off of how often it's sold? And so to test the predictive power of propagule pressure, we create what are called receiver operating characteristic curves. And these are based off of 2 models that are fit to the data. So one model tests how well propagule pressure separates introduction from establishment or invasion, and the other establishment from invasive species. So in the following slide, curves which are closer to the upper left part of the plot perform better than those that are not. So we can see that the predictive power of propagule pressure on establishment is relatively good. We get this thing called an AUC value of 0.76, which the closer to 1 that value is, the better performing the model is. So we can say that propagule pressure is doing a pretty good job at predicting what species become established. But the ROC plot of invasion based only on propagule pressure is very poor. It has an AUC value of 0.5, which is basically equivalent to random chance. So these plots tell us that propagule pressure is a strong predictor of non-native plant establishment, but a weak predictor of non-native plant invasive success. And the relationship between ornamental plant propagules and establishment is especially significant in the context of climate change. So an example, the map on the right shows the current invasive range of Mahonia beale, or Beale's barberry, in the striped red in the southern part of the map. And in the light red above the current invasive range, you can see future invasion risk, which was modeled, where higher risk is darker red and lower risk is lighter red. So the triangles represent nursery locations which are currently offering this species for sale. And you can see that there are many nurseries within the current invasive range of the species selling it and contributing to that active invasion, but there are also nurseries selling the species within areas of projected future risk as our climate continues to warm, which could facilitate the establishment and spread of this species further north than its current invasive range. So some conclusions, our results show that propagule pressure is significant and strong predictor of plant establishment, but only a significant but weak predictor of invasive success. And this suggests that propagule pressure more directly influences the establishment success for non-native plants than invasive success. And establishment is generally thought to be governed by abiotic filters, so therefore our results suggest that if we flood the ornamental market with propagules of a new species, this will really aid in the species passing through these abiotic filters to establishment, but not necessarily those biotic filters to invasion. And lastly, as our climate continues to change, propagule pressure from the ornamental plant trade will facilitate the establishment of invasive species outside of their current ranges. And one way to combat this is by planting climate-smart native species in our gardens. We can do that. By doing so, we'll increase climate resiliency of our local ecosystems and avoid the further spread of invasive species and the establishment of new ones. There's a QR code there for the paper that goes along with this that was published last year, and also if you want to learn more about climate-smart native gardening specifically, you can check out this resource from the Northeast Risk that I'm a part of, which can it's a data set of hundreds of native candidate species for states in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic US for planting. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. That last paper that Matt just showed, we talked about yesterday as well. That's the one that's been downloaded almost 7,000 times in like 5 or 6 months. So check it out. Thanks, Matt, and for all the great work you do. And we're going to move right on to Dr. Taylor Woods. If you have questions for Matt, put them in the chat. Matt, I think there's a question about a paper there for you. So Dr. Taylor Woods is with the Eastern Ecological Research Center. There she is. And she's going to be speaking to us about risk assessment of invasive fishes across 5 large landscapes. Take it away, Taylor.
So thanks everyone for the opportunity to talk today. It's been really great to learn a little bit about all the great work that's being done on this topic globally. But today I'll be focusing on an ongoing project where we're looking at the risk of stream habitats to non-native fishes across 5 regions of the US. The regions that we're focused on are the Columbia, Upper Colorado, Great Lakes, Chesapeake, and Mobile watersheds. So this group of regions was interesting to look at because they span broad gradients of hydroclimate, and they also have very different native fish assemblages and experience different degrees of anthropogenic stressors. So when we started on this project, we weren't entirely sure what our endpoints for the analysis would be. So we reached out to local partners in each region to basically get a sense of, within each region, what are the on-the-ground concerns about changing environments and fishes. And after all of that feedback, we went back and kind of synthesized it and tried to identify similarities and differences in partners' concerns about changing environments and fishes. And one common theme that popped out was that managers in every region were concerned about the effects of potential changing environments facilitating the expansion of invasive fishes, and also how those fishes might affect native biota. And this isn't entirely unique to our regions. This interaction between climate change and invasion is highlighted as a challenge to managers globally. So one tool that can help inform decision-making are risk assessments of potential exposure of streams to non-natives under different scenarios of future change. This can be especially useful to predict the invasive risk at all streams through space and time. Model outputs can be used in prevention efforts to minimize, and as well as control efforts to control the spread of established invasives. Often, these kind of habitat assessment approaches might only focus on the exposure of habitats to non-native fishes. But it's increasingly recognized that there's a couple of more pieces of information that might be handy to include in these assessments. So first, thinking about how to incorporate the sensitivity of native fishes to environmental changes or non-natives can lend an additional perspective into risk assessments. With these approaches, you can identify high-risk habitats as those where non-native suitability might shift from low to high, and also where native biota might be especially sensitive to those changes. So we use 2 response variables in our risk assessment, both native and non-native habitat suitability. And for the method that we wanted to use, we chose a discrete Bayesian network modeling approach, which has been applied successfully in the Everglades landscape region. And it's particularly useful for management assessments because it's flexible and intuitive. For our response variable, we identified breakpoints in the distribution of native and non-native abundance per sample, and classified our response into categories, which was necessary because our network model required discrete input data. And to categorize our predictors, we overlaid the distribution of the predictor, the continuous predictors against our response classes. So this allows you to identify breakpoints in your predictor variables that are particularly associated with one class of your responses. So for example, in the Chesapeake, which is a region that's highlighted up on the upper left, we see a break point in the distribution of temperature where lower native abundances are found at higher temperatures. And we see over in the Mobile on the bottom right, we see that the majority of high non-native abundances are associated with higher temperatures. So this is flexible because it allowed us to identify region-specific breakpoints that were strongly associated with the classes of our response metrics. And for the different types of predictors we included, we wanted to look at potential future changes. So we used different scenarios of future land use and climate. So we used land use scenarios that range from moderate development as well as an intensive land use change, more developed scenario. And for temperature and precipitation, we use multiple scenarios of climate futures, and we summarize them into seasons. And this was flexible because we could select different seasons per region if we anticipated that seasonal effects of climate change might vary across these regions. And for future scenarios, we included different scenarios of future temperature and precipitation change that ranged from maximum to minimum change. So this allowed us to look at what warmer habitats across the board might look like with drier precipitation scenarios versus wetter precipitation scenarios. And we also had a couple of additional variables to include. We know that non-natives are often transported or spread through humans. So we included variables associated with recreational fishing demand to account for potential propagule pressure. We also included other metrics like habitat fragmentation by dams and natural variation in stream size. Using our hypothesized networks, we trained our models to predict non-native and native habitat suitability and use cross-validation procedures to assess model performance. The trained models were then applied to predict at all streams across the landscape. We also forced through different scenarios of future climate and land use change to investigate potential shifts in the distribution of at-risk habitats under future environmental changes. So these are preliminary results of our trained networks, and it's a little busy, but the important thing to note is over there on the right-hand side that shows the distribution of our model performance across all of our cross-validations. And this can allow us to assess where we might do a particularly better job at predicting non-native habitat suitability versus native habitat suitability. So it can help us understand where we might need more information in our networks to describe important processes. And I didn't show a whole lot of results because this is still ongoing work. But now that we have those model outputs, the next step will be to synthesize these predictions and reveal general patterns and processes associated with high-risk habitats with respect to natural gradients and things like stream size and elevation. So while the habitat assessment is nice, sometimes we need some species level information to help us understand why some species are particularly effective invaders. So for example, some species might be able to exploit open niches if they occupy particular trophic levels without native competition. Or they might have reproductive traits that disproportionately favor their survival of their offspring relative to native fishes. And in some cases, invasives have a little bit of help along the way. So often, invasive fishes in particular might be introduced because humans like to catch really big fishes, and there's tournaments to see who can catch the biggest fish. And these same traits are also useful because they can be used to predict what species might become potential invaders in the future. So we collected traits based on a number of hypotheses about which trait values might favor non-natives relative to native fishes. And we use classification trees to test these hypotheses and then to predict the invasive status of species that currently don't occur in the region. So we see variation in the processes underlying invasive taxa across regions. Thermal tolerance might be important in Great Lakes and the Columbia, whereas fisheries use was very predictive in the Chesapeake and Colorado. And I'm running short on time. So we were then able to synthesize which species might become invasives in the future, which could be prioritized in early detection efforts. And in next steps, we will look at species-specific endpoints and also incorporate flow regime from some state-of-the-art stream model output that we have. And that's it. So I'll say thank you very much. And thank you to the organizers and all the presenters.
Super job. And you got a great compliment in the chat that said your presentation design is beautiful. I love how informative and easy to read it is, and also nice looking. So thank you for that great talk, Dr. Woods. Next up, we have Annabelle Lamoureux, who will be speaking to us from University of Quebec. So welcome, Annabelle. We can see your slides and you can just go ahead and get started.
Hello, hi everyone. I hope you are doing well. Thank you for assisting to my presentation. So I will present my master's project, which I am still working on, but I have some preliminary results to show you. So my project uses a cellular and molecular approach to investigate cold tolerance and the invasive green crab, Carcinus minus, to understand its expansion under climate change. So before starting, I want to mention that my project is part of a larger initiative created in collaboration with Fisheries and Ocean Canada, as well as Nova University in Portugal, which aims to address the challenges posed by the arrival of the green crab. So to put my study into context, ocean warming removes thermal barriers, which historically limited species range, but now allows species to move poleward where temperature anomalies are increasing at a rapid rate. Such is the case in the Northern Hemisphere. As you can see here, there has been a rapid increase in the temperature anomalies since 1990. But ocean warming especially facilitates the establishment of invasive species. We can see here that there is an increase in the entry of non-native species in new environments with the increase of Northern Hemisphere temperature anomalies. This can be due to invasive species' high tolerance to environmental variations, which enables them to exploit new habitats. However, the successful establishment of invasive species in colder environments poleward depend on their ability to withstand low temperatures, underscoring the importance of looking into the mechanisms of cold tolerance and its role in the expansion of invasive species. Classical invasion risk assessment often use whole body traits. While they are closely linked to fitness, they do not necessarily provide a complete understanding of an organism's stress response. Investigating cold stress response at the cellular and molecular levels can spot early molecular events, which are responsible for adverse effects observed at higher biological organization levels, such as mortality. Expanding our understanding of these processes is critical to understand how organisms may cope with cold stress. Next, I have identified some knowledge gaps. So first, the role of cold tolerance in driving or limiting invasive species expansion, as I mentioned earlier, and the inter-individual differences in response to environmental stress, particularly at the cellular and molecular levels, and how these differences may impact the establishment of invasive species. Indeed, most studies investigating the cellular and molecular mechanisms in response to environmental stress often overlook the fact that these responses can be sex-specific. In addition, the introduction of invasive species from multiple origins could create opportunities for hybridization between previously isolated lineages, which could impact the success of establishment of invasive species due to possible genetic advantages or disadvantages. Such gaps in our prediction of invasive species trajectories and success is important to consider and to include these factors in investigating the expansion of invasive species. So in this context, my study aims to identify cellular and molecular mechanisms involved in tolerance to low temperatures that may enable invasive species to colonize cold habitats. So specifically, I'm looking into stress biomarkers and the metabolomic profiles of the invasive green crab exposed to low temperatures of its thermal niche. And I'm also considering the sex and genetic differences. So the biomarkers are selected to analyze the mechanisms that are sensitive to thermal stress, and the targeted metabolomics are used to assess the role of metabolic pathways central to energy production, capturing the actual state of metabolic adjustments to cold stress. The green crab is native from Europe, but has invaded almost all continents. It is considered as an ecosystem engineer because of its substantial impacts on native biodiversity. For example, it outcompetes native species for food and habitat. It preys on many taxa, reducing fishery and aquaculture stocks, and alters coastal habitats. In Canada, the green crab comes from two independent invasions. So one is from Northern Europe, adapted to cold temperatures, and one is from Southern Europe, adapted to more warm temperatures. These two genetically distinct groups have hybridized in Canada, creating a hybridization zone in Nova Scotia. These hybrids have also propagated in Newfoundland later on. In addition, the Pacific coast of Canada has also been invaded by the southern lineage already present in eastern Canada, through the transportation with lobster shipments. So my hypothesis is that cold tolerance in the green crab is shaped by lineage and sex interactions. My first prediction is that the males will be more tolerant than the females, although this is not always the case in crustaceans, due to the higher energetic cost of reproduction in females. My second prediction is that the northern lineage, which is adapted to cold temperatures, will be more tolerant to low temperatures than the hybrids, and then the hybrids will be more tolerant than the southern lineage. So to answer my question, we have collected crabs from these 4 locations, which corresponds to their specific lineages, in addition to the population in British Columbia. We have chosen our sites according to these many studies that has already been done on the genetic differences of the green crabs present in Canada. So these crabs from the 3 lineages across 4 locations have been submitted to temperature treatments in experimental tanks for 30 days of exposure. So we adjusted the temperature tanks precisely by using an automated system regulating the input of hot and cold water. So after 30 days of exposure to low temperatures, the hepatopancreas has been sampled and used for molecular and cellular analysis. So to assess the antioxidant defenses, the oxidative damage, and the protein repair capacity associated with the heat shock response, and also the energy production and regulation through the characterization of metabolites using the metabolomic approach. So with this data, I have performed some preliminary results on the northern lineage only. So I did PCAs and Bermanovas. So as we can see in this PCA biplot, the 3 ellipses represent the 3 temperature treatments, which overlap, meaning that the cellular response is similar across temperatures. This means that the green crabs from the northern lineage are tolerant to very low temperatures, which was expected. Here I have represented my data by sex, and we can see that the females show stronger and more extensive cellular stress responses to low temperatures, shown by the arrows pointing to females. And the Bermanovas also confirm that the response from the males and females are significantly different. Next will be to analyze the other lineages to compare with these first results. So my study will allow to understand the thermal barriers that limit invasion, to predict the expansion of invasive species, and to support the implementation of preventive control measures. So for example, my data could be integrated with physical-chemical parameters to create maps that identifies regions that are vulnerable to the expansion of green crops. So thank you for your attention. Thank you for the opportunity. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate.
Thank you so much, Annabelle. So fantastic to have you presenting to us and see this project. I guess just quickly, did anything surprise you?
With my study?
Yeah.
I guess not for now, because I only analyzed the northern lineage, and I expected the northern lineage to be tolerant to low temperatures. And I also expected the sex to respond differently, so I guess not for now.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned for next time. You can come back and present the next results to us next year. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
And next we have up Henrique Couto, and from the Center for Ecology, Evolution, and Environmental Changes on understanding the spread, the origin and distribution of non-native lepidopterans. In case you're not keeping track, we have had in this session plants, fish, crabs, and Lepidoptera. So I think we're doing pretty well. Our session might win for taxonomic diversity. So Henrik, you can take it away.
Hello, I'm Henrique. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Lisbon, and today I'm going to talk a bit about my project. So currently we have enormous amount of data being produced daily, and ecology is absolutely no exception. So having access to this data is particularly useful to do macroecological analysis and understand macroecological patterns, but it has several difficulties, such as the lack of data curation. However, lately for invasive species, there has been efforts to solve this by establishing condensed databases. Looking at the timeline, we can highlight some of them. In 2015, it was developed one for plants. In 2017, 3 more, one for birds, another for reptile and amphibians, and another for ants. And more recently in 2020, one for macrofungi, and in 2021, one for mammals. This year was developed one for human disease-borne vector mosquitoes as well. In this list, there is something that becomes clear, and that's the lack of databases on insects. That's why we hope to publish next year one on lepidopterans, so moths and butterflies. And why moths and butterflies? Because they are a highly diverse group. They are worldwide distributed, and they cause severe damages on economy, ecosystems, and human welfare as well. Besides, currently is known that the invasion records have been increasing. And understanding their patterns of invasion and establishment, it's key for a correct global management, damage control, and know how the patterns will change with climate change. So what is known until now? Turner published in 2021 the first version of the International Non-Native Insect Establishment data and updated it last year, and Molly in 2022 published based on that database an analysis on the lepidopterans. However, these are focused on 11 regions worldwide. And even though they are to capture an image on the global patterns of invasion and establishment as well, it still needed to know the temporal trends, the drivers, and how those patterns are changing. This leads us to my PhD project that focuses on four main questions that I'm trying to answer by building a global database, analyzing the biogeographic patterns, do a global scale assessment of impacts, ecological and economic, and forecast the range expansion and future impacts. For today, I'm going to focus on the first two. And as for the methodology, and without entering in too much detail, we started by gathering data from scientific literature, established databases, and technical reports as well, that we then extracted, transformed, and loaded into our database that can be summarized in two main tables: a records table and a native range table. To standardize the geography, that it was one of the main problems, we did to the administrative regions to the insularity and continental level. So, for example, Russia was considered as two separate regions, one for Europe and another for Asia, but Portugal was divided into three: a continental Portugal, Madeira Archipelago, and Azores Archipelago. To understand the drivers of establishment, we collected data for socioeconomical variables, land usage data, bioclimatic variables as well, and geographical data concerning the area in square kilometers and insularity. We also used as a proxy for the invasion sampling bias the average values for the national capacities to respond to the threat of emerging species invasions from the paper here mentioned, that is from early 2016. So now going to the most interesting part. Regarding the temporal trends, it's possible to observe a pattern that has already been shown today. That starts in the 1500s with the maritime transportation from Europeans, an increased number of establishment in the second half of the 19th century and first half of the 20th with the Industrial Revolution, and an exponential growth from 1960 up till now with the current globalization process. You can follow my results in a data dashboard that is available through the QR code as well. So seeing now on the different species, we found that 937 species are already established worldwide, from which 67 are already present in 10 or more regions. Looking at our podium, we found that the most dispersed was the greater wax moth, followed by the tomato leaf miner, and to finish the podium, the fall armyworm. So how about where? 65 regions had 10 or more established species, and the continental conterminous United States was the region with most establishment records. So where did they come from? This was our flow diagram that can be better understood here. So Asian species have mainly dispersed to North America, to Europe, inside Asia, and to Oceania. As for European species, they have spread mostly to North America and inside Europe, sorry. As for Australian species that had a smaller impact, they are already spread to Oceania, and African species have spread to Europe. As for the drivers, with a generalized linear mixed model, we identified that the detection capacity, insularity, and GDP had a positive influence, while the mean annual temperature, the area, and the population density had a negative effect on the total number of species per region. This helped identify that the sampling effort influenced on the detection, naturally, but also that temperate regions are more prone to invasions, with Europe and Oceania being particularly affected. And surprisingly, these patterns are found amongst other taxa. When we finally consider the temporal trends, the species and distributions, the flows, and our model results, a clear pattern emerges, and that's it. That's for the current and colonial trade is still shaping the global invasion patterns. So thank you for having me here today, and I would like to thank as well to everyone that had contributed to my project so far.
Thank you, Enrique. That was fantastic work. So interesting. You can see all the love in the room for your research. If you have questions for Enrique, you can drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I think we stalled long enough for folks to take pictures of that QR code. So I think we'll move on to our last speaker. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Last but not least, we have Kayleen Falkenstein. And Kayleen comes from us as the conservation coordinator with the Edmonton Area Land Trust. I'm going to say your title, which is Expanding Capacity for Invasive Plant Control on Privately Conserved Lands. This will be the last talk in our session. And then I'm going to tell you for 10 minutes about how awesome the meeting was. Don't leave. So go ahead, take it away, Caitlin.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Edmonton is the capital city within Alberta in Canada. We're within Treaty 6 territory, and there's many Indigenous peoples here. The Cree name for this area is Amaskwaci-Weskhaken, which is Beaver Hills House. Beavers are a very important animal in this region. So yeah, I'll give some context first to land trusts and their role in conservation and their role in invasive species controls. Then that way we can see how this can hopefully benefit more than just a land trust like us, but maybe other agencies as well who have small capacity. So land trusts conserve private land, and they do so either through owned land or conservation easements. And our land trust operates within 150 kilometers of Edmonton and conserves habitat within the Aspen Parkland and Boreal regions. So that's either like the green, which is like parkland, almost like grassland habitat, as well as the brown, which is like the boreal forest. And in a more specific map to Alberta, the light green is the parkland habitat, which is like a transition zone between the I can use the laser pointer. Transition zone between the grasslands in the south and the boreal forest in the north. So those are the two areas that we focus on conserving. And as we own and manage land, that means we do have to maintain and preserve that habitat quality, and that's our main goal. And as land managers, we are required to control invasive species, like, similar to a farmer or a private landowner as well. We're required to by provincial regulations. And it takes up a lot of our time. I usually say my job is mostly weeding and trail maintenance in the summer. So the main question for this presentation is, how can a small charity manage these lands and successfully control invasive plant species? And I'm going to be focusing mostly on terrestrial plants today. And so the invasive plant species that we have kind of in our area of central Alberta is really hawkweed species, Hericium, and those are like prohibited noxious, a higher risk species, and then other common ones like common tansy, white cockle, creeping Canada thistle, that kind of thing. So those are some common species that we have to deal with. So we use an integrated pest management approach. So we don't just use one type of invasive plant control across our sites, but depending on the conditions and what is best suited for the size of patch, and if it's an early detection, we'll use across these different methods. I'd say most of our time is focused on mechanical control. And then if we have the capacity, we're going to use something like chemical control for like a larger patch or a really high risk, like early detection of a new invasive plant. And then as we can use them, we're happy to use biocontrol when the agents are available. We have had some success with goats doing targeted browsing in the past, which is really cool, but we're limited by funding. And that's why I thought I would present to this conference, is that climate change really exacerbates these conditions and limits the available control methods we have. We're really noticing that the phenology of these invasive plants is changing and being more inconvenient for us who mostly use mechanical methods, and that the flowering times are sooner or extended. I was seeing common tansy flowering in October this year. Crazy. Also with the increased amount of wildfires, there's more smoke and extreme heat warnings in our area, that limits the amount of times we can use our small engine equipment maybe to hack down a patch more frequently. So that's delaying our field visits and delaying what kind of visits we're able to do. And, these are the other kind of limitations that we're dealing with as well, but it's really limiting our available options that we have for invasive plant control. We usually, between our management breakdown, we're a very small team. There's only 7 of us and really 4 of us field staff doing all this work. For large patches, we'll be focusing on doing mechanical control as we can in mowing, and really focusing on our high risk early detection, so we can use early detection rapid response between us and our contractors. And then the way we use volunteers are when it's a patch that we can accomplish in a day when volunteers join us. That's really when we're going to bring them out to site, and so we can attack one patch of weeds together. But then we saw this opportunity for independent volunteers, and what we thought a few years ago, during COVID, we were brainstorming ways to increase our capacity, and we're it'd be really great if volunteers can go out to these sites independently, because mechanical control, just pulling weeds or chopping weeds down with a hedge trimmer or a weed whacker, it's pretty easy to do and easy to train. What if we could train volunteers to do this? So that was our thought, and that's how the Conservation Land Stewards program began to be. We really wanted to provide an opportunity to really get committed to conservation. And in this program, they actually commit to 2 years of visiting frequently to one site. They really gain a connection to like that specific land, and they get specific training for that land and how best to steward and take care of it. So they visit twice per month throughout the summer with a field partner. And it's amazing how committed these people actually are and how they continue in the program, even past 2 years. And when we train them, how it looks is we have both online and in-person training. The online training covers the safety requirements as well as an invasive plant identification video. And then we take them for a tour on the land in the spring. So in that way they can see the priority areas of like this patch of weeds usually comes up in June. This is how you take care of it. And it's really great time to bond with these volunteers that we otherwise might not see very often, considering they're visiting independently. And then for operations, most of their time is involved in invasive plant management in the summer. That's like the highest priority task that we communicate to them for the summer, and that's when most of their visits are. And then the rest of the time of year, there's other activities that they can do as well to steward these sites. And we communicate the priority patches that we want them to focus on. So we'll say like, hey, there's this one patch of orange hawkweed, really want to take care of this one. Please work on it together, and I'll update them monthly. And during a visit, this is how it works for us. They do their stewardship work. They go around the land, and while they're doing that work, they collect data for us. They record data about the invasive plants and also take some photos. And then after their visit, they send a report including those data and photos. So these are some examples of what our maps look like that we send to these volunteers, and also the data we collect from the reports. So each of the maps specific to each site, these patches will have labels. So we'll say like this is patch number 17, and then they'll describe the condition of the patch and how much they were able to remove on that visit. And that's an example of what our form looks like that they fill in. And then this gets put into our monitoring database, and it's really great for us because then we get lots of lines of data of all the different patches that were worked on throughout the year, because we might only be able to see them one time. We have 22 sites that we work on. So we might only get to see one patch a few times a season at most. So this is really, really great to have multiple lines of data for us to work with. And we can, over the month, each month, we can communicate the progress that we've made on each of these patches. So then we can update on if we can still maintain progress on one or switch priorities to a different one. So that's just a brief overview of how this program works and how we use it to expand our capacity for invasive plant management. And we're really happy to see that the impact of this volunteer team is amazing, and it's expanded our capacity so much. So the main example here is how many visits we were able to do per site. So across our 22 sites, 14 of those are open to the public. And if you do the math, that's barely enough time to go to each of these sites like once a month if you're maybe prioritizing one more than the other. So we maybe only got to go to each site 3 or 4 times per field season, and then maybe have one volunteer event. And this was before the program was in place. And then afterwards, we still might only have the same amount of staff visits, but we're having over 10 visits by volunteers each year now to these sites. So it's really increased our capacity and how much we're able to cover in both like land, in acres, and in the amount of work that we can accomplish together. We can use early detection rapid response more effectively. So we're really happy to see that like I'm so much more aware of what invasive plants we have on our sites, because then as soon as there's a tiny little patch that with maybe only a few plants, that steward has been there for 2 years and know these trails so well and can notice these new spots really easily. I'm also seeing an opportunity to notice this change in phenology at a finer scale, because we're having multiple people tell us that like, oh, the flowering time of common tansy was June 1st this year. And so it's really cool for us to see. There's definitely more opportunities for research and management, so we can collect more specific data for that plant phenology and hopefully send it off to someone who could use it, maybe like a monitoring institute in our region. And then we can also hopefully collect more data on biocontrol effectiveness. Since we have more boots on the ground because of this program, I've been training these volunteers in recognizing thistle rust fungus, which is a possible biocontrol agent for creeping thistle that like long-term reduces its effectiveness at like being prolific. And if more volunteers can notice that, the like existence of that rust fungus, we could hopefully try and use it in the future. And finally, longer term data over time, hopefully we can see the changes of effective invasive plant control methods against the changing climate. So those are just a few examples of opportunities we could use. And I'm really willing to share about the format and how we've framed this program and set it up and how we organize it and manage these volunteers. And I really hope that this is a tool that other small agencies, other land trusts, charities, maybe like a small state park could use as well. So then that way they can have more boots on the ground controlling invasive plants. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kayleen. What a great way for us to wrap up our conference, because it was really like very specific and detailed and on the ground and sharing your experience. We really appreciate that. So yes, applause for Kayleen. There's one question from the Q&A for you there that you can write in there. So with that, I'm going to wrap us up. Okay, we did it. Just stick with me for a few minutes and I'm going to run you through everything that we just did in the last 10 hours or whatever it was. I am really happy to have run the gamut from like global modeling to very specific on the ground experience that folks have. And to have had all of you here with all of your love and emojis to share it with. So success, we did it. We pulled off the second ISK. And I just like quickly will run through, show you like what you saw or maybe missed today. Dr. Ross Cuthbert talked to us about economic costs for biological invasions, engaged us with a little Breaking Bad humor. We had a wonderful session of management success stories, which I just love. I love doing this. It's always my favorite thing. People telling like when things work, I think is so powerful. So we heard about community outreach. We heard about hundreds of thousands of green crabs being turned into compost. And Crabzilla came up kind of throughout the day. Apparently this is what hope looks like in Hawaii, but somehow Brian Tucker did it with us still like smiling and laughing. So thank you for that. A huge hit, we could tell, was the Wait Don't Tell Me It's an Invasive Species. Thanks again to Elliot and Paul and everyone who did this. So wonderful. All the hard work clearly paid off and emojis and hilarity ensued. And then we just closed off with a session from our early careers. So that's awesome to see folks doing all this great work, from kind of looking at risk assessments from around the country, around the US, to specific invasive plants management, how people work with volunteers. So great. So the last thing I'm going to do is just show you the results from our survey. So this is where we were. Last year we had somebody from South America and Antarctica. I was always suspicious of the Antarctica, but we'll have to get our South American friends back for next year. We had about 1,000 participants over the 2 days. So that's amazing for a conference that just started last year. I thought we learned a lot about you in this Fenty poll, but I just wanted to note that we actually have people from all over. So there's not, given that this is a conference with presentations, often maybe you expect it's mostly researchers and academics, and this really wasn't. It was a real mix of people from all over the place. What are you worried about? A lot of things. It's really a range, which makes sense because this is global. But maybe your favorite thing you might catch there in the details. You can see some big ones popping up like EAB and spotted lanternfly, knotweed, beach leaf disease, those HWA, those are all things we think about in the Northeast. But I think I see a lot of things that are smaller that I don't recognize as easily. And so you can kind of take a look here. It occurs to me I didn't reintroduce myself. Maybe you know by now, but I'm Toni Lynn Morelli. I am a co-founder of the Risk Network and a research ecologist with the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. Thanks for the laughter emoji. I guess you can see my name on here. That's nice. Okay. This is supposed to say future concerns. Sorry about that. I was multitasking. But you can see kudzu. Everyone's afraid of kudzu. Golden mussels quite big. EAB. You can see some things. I hadn't heard of creeping meadow foxtail, but there you go. We don't have plant blindness for that one. So you can see a lot of things in here that people are concerned about that are interestingly different than this list. Okay, so this one was really interesting. So I looked at this survey. I just pulled out the things that I thought you might be particularly interested in. I really, this one struck me. So People said they're more likely that they would like to collaborate more with researchers and scientists. So researchers and scientists in the audience, like, take note. People want to work with you, which is awesome. So I love that as an answer here. You can see all kinds of answers, of course. Local community members comes up huge as well. This one was a rolling one that had like 17 pages. Here are some of the things folks said about what are the biggest barriers to successful collaboration for climate-informed invasive species management. So we have kind of the typical time, resources, funding. At the risk, we always note when it says knowledge or research, we feel like maybe that's a gap we can fill. But you can see a lot of interesting answers here on this list. A lot of these things were repeated. And then what I wanted to spend a little time with is this one. So if you were paying close attention, I presented the intro yesterday and the slide looks the same, but I promise I changed the words. So this is not exactly the same slide. These are different answers. The one before was from last year. So you can see that again, we talked about colleagues and coworkers, community, our volunteers, you know, really coming back to this idea of building things being better together. And I just saw a couple here that I really liked, so I wanted to call them out. This encouraging others who are starting out, serving the future, the possibility of a local breakthrough one day. And then, I don't know, I loved this one. It could mean a lot to different people, but this one, someone said, so someday a kid like I was won't have to travel so far to work towards their calling. So, yeah, I know we're like limited on emojis. I noticed there's like no thumbs down because maybe they think we were talking about the presenter, but of course we'd be talking about like the green crab or whatever. And I don't know if there's any crying emojis, so I appreciate the hearts. Okay, so awesome. So love all of these thoughts. And I just want to close out by saying thank you again to our partners, to the Risks who came out 10 years ago to say translational invasion ecology is important. This work needs to be done. The invasive species managers told us we need people to bridge the gap between climate change and invasive species. And we're doing it. We're like, work really, really hard to bring this community together, to this work together, to produce new work, to digest work that exists. So hopefully you got a flavor of that here, of all the work the Risks are doing. Very closely allied with this are the CASCs, and they're doing that work in the climate adaptation space. We love all our partners on here. I just wanted to give a big shout out to NASMA for hosting us. As always, thank you for making things seamless. Okay, so I don't know if I warned you all, but I was hoping you all would turn on your videos. And it'll take a minute because there's like, in the background of this, you might imagine there's like a lot of tech support happening from this crew of 12 people of like constantly spotlighting and changing things. But these people, some of them had to run already, but are fantastic. They are volunteering their time. They're working. We started working on this, I think, in February. I think I mentioned, but I dropped off for 6 weeks because of the US government shutdown. And we pulled it off. I'm just like in awe of the energy and time and competence and just brilliance of this group. So thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody, and especially Eva, who made sure that everything like got done this year. So thanks to all these folks. Okay. So the last thing is just to say we'll see you next year. Please, please, please fill out the survey. We use it to plan the next year. So QR code, this survey, and maybe somebody can drop it in the chat. risknetwork.org is our home. You can find lots of information, lots of things you heard about today, just even like on phenology. We have tons of research and information and everything on all these things. So I think with that, the thing we like to do here at Risk is to do things really big and then send people home a few minutes early. So that's what we'll do today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Drop any comments or thoughts in the chat. Thanks for your time and energy and everything you give to the world. We see you, we appreciate you, we know what you're doing, and just know that it's worth it for what you're doing today, for the future that will appreciate it, for the people that you're modeling for out there that'll come behind us. And we'll see you next year.